I have 1 minute.
Yep.
All right. Yay.
I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Tuesday, guys. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Kevin Penna. He is a contributing editor for Haiti Info Project. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Sabby.
All right. So I want to kick this off by starting. I know that you've done a lot of research about Haiti, especially when it comes to U.S. intervention as well. This story came out recently. Biden emphasizes close relationship with Canada, as the nation's vow to address climate change, Russia, and the Ukraine war. And the other thing that happened during this meeting, it seems like Joe Biden is trying to urge Justin Trudeau to get involved with Haiti. And I want to hear your take about that. Like, why do you feel that Joe Biden is trying to get Canada involved in Haiti intervention?
Canada is already involved. Canada has warships that are now blockading the coast of Haiti so that Haitians cannot flee what is a nightmare that is the result of both U.S. and Canadian foreign policy, beginning with the coup of 2004 that ousted the democratically elected government of Jean-Bertrand Aristide. And not just Aristide, people don't realize it was more than 7,500 officials who were forced out of office at the local level, the municipal level, and the national level, as well as a purging of the police, followed by a 13 and a half year UN foreign military occupation led primarily by the United States and Canada, who took direct responsibility, saying they were going to rebuild Haiti's democratic institutions, that they were going to rebuild the police, they were going to rebuild the judiciary, they're going to rebuild the courts. And of course, we see the nightmare that Haiti is today, which is the result of that policy. And Canada has marched in lockstep with U.S. foreign policy before and since the coup of 2004.
This is crazy. Why do you think Justin Trudeau seems to be okay with this?
Well, it's not just Justin Trudeau. It's happened under successive Canadian administrations, going all the way back to Paul Martin. Both liberal and conservative parties have supported intervention in Haiti, have supported a policy of intervening in Haiti's political landscape, of intervening in the outcome of Haiti's elections. But again, taking near virtual 100% responsibility for the police, the judiciary, and the prison system, which today are the three pillars of the nightmare that so-called gangs, which now Haitians are no longer calling them gangs, they're now calling them paramilitary groups, because these are military structured organizations. These are no longer just people who decided to get together and control a neighborhood with guns. These are all organizations that are military in structure and design. They have a head at the top. They have lieutenants. They've got captains at the local levels. And more importantly, they've all been part of a larger structure coming down from the top of the U.S. installed PHTK political party that began with a direct intervention of then Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton that brought Michel Martelly to power, intervening, actually changing the way the elections were tabulated, pushing the OAS to support that as well, leading ultimately to a second successive regime of Jovenel Moise. Throughout this time, I don't think people realize there were protests of tens of thousands of people from the very day that Martelly was elected to the very day that Jovenel Moise was killed. There were tens of thousands of protests against election fraud, whether it be Martelly's election or whether it be Jovenel Moise. And the most important thing to remember is that the police were part of that regime, and that part of the strategy of the PHTK to stay in power was to use the police as cutouts, was to use the police to guide and create relationships with so-called gangs, which are really paramilitary organizations that were used against Haiti's opposition during successive protests against those regimes. And that when Jovenel Moise was killed, they lost that structure, but most of it remains intact. We can still show, there was a recent internal poll that was taken inside of Haiti where from neighborhoods, they said that they believe that more than 80% of the police still have contacts with paramilitary gangs in poor neighborhoods in Port-au-Prince. So it's part of a structure, right? That came out of intervention that the United States and Canada both have direct responsibility for.
Well said. I know even going back to 1915, I was telling the audience about this a couple weeks ago. Woodrow Wilson. So Woodrow Wilson, at one point, he sent in the U.S. Marines to occupy Haiti and to take over their banking industry and their political sphere. So even if we go all the way back to 1915, even Woodrow Wilson, I want people to understand this isn't something that started with Joe Biden or Bill Clinton. Like, this goes all the way back to Woodrow Wilson. And we have to wonder, like, the economic state that we see Haiti in today, we can point fingers in reference to U.S. intervention. There was no reason for the U.S. government to intervene in Haiti even back then. But from what I understand, Woodrow Wilson was pushed to do so by the banks.
Well, that's true, but it's not even comparable to what their role has been. Again, 13 years, although the U.S. military occupation was 19 years. And at that time, it was the longest U.S. military occupation in history before the occupation of Afghanistan, of course, overtook that record. And yes, there was also resistance, the Cacos, the famous resistance wars led by Charlemagne Perrault. There was, the United States imposed an almost quasi-slavery system, where in order for Haitians to earn a living, they had to work on gangs, on chain gangs, basically. If there was any question about who controlled Haiti, it was the U.S. Marines. But that's not even comparable to what happened under the United Nations and that coup of 2004. That under Martelly's regime, there were sweetheart deals that were cut with mining companies in the United States and in Canada. There were sweetheart deals that were made with apparel manufacturers in both of those countries. And so there's a contemporary economic reason behind United States and Canadian intervention in Haiti today. When it comes to workers, Haitian workers hold down the bottom of the price of wage in the region. We know basic economics, if the wages of the lowest go up, then all those wages go up. Well, just by threatening to move to Haiti, U.S. and Canadian apparel manufacturers can force down demands of workers in Honduras, can force down demands of other workers in the union, just by simply making the threat of taking advantage of Haiti's cheaper labor, saving them tens of millions of dollars. I don't think people realize that. But more importantly, when Aristide was in office, he had commissioned one of the most deep studies of Haiti's mineral wealth. And what was discovered And there was a published book called the Lavalas White Paper. It's called Dans le Humain. And in that geological survey, it was discovered that Haiti has more than 300 tons of iridium. If you look at the price of iridium today, you can see that this is literally hundreds of billions of dollars that is sitting under Haitian soil. And these mining companies are chomping at the bit to get at it. Under Martelly, he signed sweetheart deals with them that they could never actualize because Haiti's 1987 constitution, while it doesn't use the word nationalize, it makes it very clear that all of Haiti's mineral wealth is to be used on the national collectivity, is the term it used, which is virtually what it means is nationalization. This is exactly why Martelly and Jovenel Moïse have pushed so hard, and the U.S. and Canada have supported them in pushing so hard to have a constitutional referendum. I don't know if you heard this. It's not just about presidential elections anymore. It's about the necessity for a constitutional referendum. And part of that will be to roll back that term in the 1987 Constitution that prohibits them from fully capitalizing and ripping off Haiti's mineral wealth. That's really what is at the heart of a lot of this right now.
I know a lot of times, like people, I don't like this term, but sometimes people refer to these countries as like third world countries, so to speak. But I try to educate people and make them aware that some of these countries that you refer to as third world countries actually are rich in resources. What do you think Haitians that are in Haiti, what do you think, is there anything that they can do to try to push back on this? And I want to ask your opinion about this gentleman that they call Barbecue. So Dan Cohen, he's been on here before. He's done a documentary about Barbecue when he went to Haiti. Do you think that this is someone that can actually help the Haitian people rebel and push back? Or do you feel like he's not a part of the solution? He's more part of the problem?
Well, you know, Dan and really the main person who's proffering that is Kim Ives. And Dan came into that later. You know, I've been involved in Haiti for 33 years. I was there when Aristide ran his first election campaign. I lived there for 10 years. Our first son was born there. You know, I saw family there. We differ very much on this question. And by the way, one of their primary, I know, rebuttals is, well, it's a NED-sponsored human rights organization, RNDDH, who's behind, you know, besmirching Barbecue's reputation. Well, I'm not RNDDH. And I have contacts in those communities and have maintained them over decades. And anybody who knows my work knows that I was very critical, and I can tell you who the precursor of RNDDH is, and that's the NCHR, the National Coalition for Haitian Rights, which was run by Joseph McCalla. They ultimately changed their name because of the horrendous human rights reporting that Pierre Esperance and Jolene Gilles were giving, twisting about what the human rights abuses that were happening after the 2004 coup. A lot of it, my reporting on the truth of what was going on the ground, battling term for term RNDDH's argument. So just to get that out of the way, I am not RNDDH, and my information comes from people in those neighborhoods. Barbecue, if his goal is revolution, and Kim likes to spin it as a Marxist revolution, well, that means that you would be, you know, the idea is that you're going to arm the people for rebellion. Barbecue doesn't trust the people to give them guns. Barbecue and his close lieutenants hold guns and have a lot of guns, heavy caliber weaponry. You know, just February 28th, which is the anniversary of the 2004 coup, because it happened on February 29th, but this last February, there was no 28th, it wasn't a leap year. There were commemorations of the 2004 coup that were planned. Early in the morning, at 7 o'clock in the morning, men with mass guns came into Solino and Bel Air. They threw grenades. They opened up with automatic weaponry on the population. And this signaled to the local gangs, including Jimmy Cherizier, the former police officer, and the G9, the G9 gang. It became open season on the population. And we have very close information confirmed by local press, as well as people who live in the neighborhoods, that G9 worked very closely with the police. They went into Bel Air with the police and indiscriminately killed people. They used the justification that they were going after another gang, a rival gang of kidnappers. Often the apologia of intergang warfare is used to cover human rights crimes that have other objectives. And again, They burned down entire blocks. Just horrendous footage. I can't even, Haiti Information Project. We can't publish in good conscience those images, but I have to look at them, those horrendous images, and I have to catalog them, and I have to put the metadata in, and I've got to archive them. And I can tell you they're just horrendous human rights violations that were committed that week after that displaced at least 600 to 1,000 people from those neighborhoods. At least 60 people were killed. At least 20 of them burned alive in their homes. And it was G9, Barbecue's group, that worked with the police in concert. Now, here's the bigger issue. We can look at the specifics of G9 and Jimmy Sherry's Air in isolation, but that is not what we do. We look at them in the larger phenomenon of what is the end game? What is this ultimately going to result in? This gang activity and this excuse of inter-gang warfare. Well, the way that the people that I speak to with in Haiti look at it is that these are paramilitary organizations that have a clear objective and strategy. And they look as if they are operating in isolation, but in fact they are not, because they all have the same ultimate goals. Those goals, three main goals. One is those neighborhoods that Jimmy Sherry's Air occupies in particular are former bastions of Lavalas. Lavalas was a majority political party under Jean-Bertrand Aristide, overthrew in 2 U.S.-backed coups. And those neighborhoods, Solino and Bel Air, have been launching sites. I was there after the 2004 coup. I can tell you that that's where the resistance to the coup was from. Those neighborhoods is where thousands of people would rise up and they would brave being shot at by U.S. Marines first, brave being shot at by United Nations soldiers, and by the UN-trained Haitian police, particularly the guys with the sharpshooters who would take headshots. That was meant to send a message of terror. But those populations that resisted came from those neighborhoods that are today being occupied by paramilitary organizations. And you can't have protests in those neighborhoods, independent of what they will allow. Those neighborhoods have spontaneously risen up historically and have taken to the street to make it clear their demands and their resistance to what they consider to be poor policies and or fraudulent elections. That cannot happen now. That's objective one. Objective two is, as we approach elections, entire populations are being displaced by these so-called occupations of these paramilitaries, and they're moving and changing the dynamic of who the electorate is when they force thousands of people to flee the capital to the provinces in the countryside, or to change to other areas. It's like a shell game. They attack one area, they claim it's inter-gang warfare, the population is displaced, and they become these nomads who no longer have the right to vote, right? A lot of them are losing their papers. It's going to be, this is going to change the electoral landscape, this displacement of populations, particularly in the capital of Port-au-Prince. Third, every kidnapping, every violent action they commit is now used as justification for foreign intervention and boots on the ground. Those are, according to the people that I speak with, who I collaborate with on the ground in Haiti, these are the three main objectives. Follow through lines, goals, if you look at what the actual outcome is of these paramilitary organizations and the role they're playing in the capital. And again, I'll also say many of them still maintain direct contact with the police force, with the Police Nationale d'Haïti.
That's interesting. I want to get everyone's attention to this here, especially for those who are just joining. It says Haiti's crisis looms large as Biden visits Canada's Trudeau. And this piece right here is particularly interesting. I really want people to really focus on what Joe Biden is really trying to do here. It says Washington has been pushing Ottawa to lead a multinational armed force in Haiti, and Biden is expected to seek an answer from Trudeau on whether Ottawa intends to take up the mission during his visit to the Canadian capital on Thursday and Friday. So they're talking about armed force here. And this is what I want people to really pay attention to this. I always tell people on the show that, foreign policy is domestic policy, because oftentimes we, in some way, shape, or form, are involved. It's just the reality of the situation. But why would the U.S. government, in your opinion, why are the U.S. government so concerned about these so-called gangs in Haiti? Why is that so concerning to President Biden? And I ask that question because if we go back to the crisis in Rwanda, remember President Bill Clinton chose not to get involved, not to intervene, but for some reason the U.S. government feels the need to intervene here with everything that's happening in Haiti.
Well, remember, Haiti still does not have political sovereignty. That the government of Ariel Henry is there as a result of the so-called core group, which was formed after the 2004 coup, of nations so-called Friends of Haiti, who changed their name to the core group, led by the United States, France, and Canada. And it is the United States. The only reason the Ariel Henry government is in power today is by virtue of the support of the United States government. There's no other way. It does not have widespread popular support, period. And every independent move of independent political thinking, any independent move of political organizing has been forestalled and cut off and unceremoniously dismissed. I mean, isn't that ultimately why Daniel Foote resigned, right? Or ostensibly, that's why he said he resigned, is because the United States will not change its policy. And that policy is one of intervention. As you rightfully said, since 1915 to the present, U.S. foreign policy at its fundamentals, and its fundamentals has not changed. And that is Haitians do not have the right to political independence. It goes to the Cold War. It goes to the question of Cuba in the region, right? It goes to the question of the elite, the U.S.-backed elites in Haiti that control the majority of the population. It goes to U.S. intervention having a hand in the outcome of elections in Haiti. And when they couldn't ensure the outcome, 2 coups d'etats, one in 1991, one in 2004. This is a history of intervention that U.S. foreign policy has at its core. And then, of course, there's the role of non-governmental organizations, all of whom are very much like missionary organizations. We are bringing to Haiti that which the Haitians cannot do for themselves, which in itself, as you can think about, is really insulting. Just as Haiti has its own spiritual leaders, thank you, those people trying to bring Christ to Haiti, Haiti also has its own political leaders and its own leadership, particularly at the base in those community organizations and structures that still cling to existence today. It's just that they've never been given a voice. It has always been trying to buy off, to offer a cut of the deal to various political actors in Haiti in order to maintain the status quo. What's the status quo? The status quo is a few families that control the importation of goods into Haiti, the Merves, the Acras, the Haluns, the Bijoux, right? Because remember that the United States helped to destroy Haiti's ability to feed itself. Part of U.S. foreign policy and intervention was destroyed Haiti's ability to feed itself. Well, what replaced that? How do Haitians eat? Well, it became U.S. reliance upon a group of allies in the elite, the wealthy elite, who control the economy by virtue of controlling the monopoly. These are not free market capitalists. These are monopolists who've shown that they'll kill, they'll murder, they'll support gangs, they'll support paramilitary organizations in order to maintain their power and privilege in that country. And then the U.S., in an insulting way, calls them the private sector, right? They whitewash them as this, but these are not, again, free market capitalists. These are monopolists who've relied on coup d'etats and relied upon political violence to maintain their power and privilege while the U.S. turned a blind eye, because these same wealthy individuals also have lawyers on K Street, also have accountants in the United States and Paris and Ottawa who help to lobby the politicians in those three countries to keep the gravy train going. Everybody benefits from this monopolistic, brutal elite that the United States is more comfortable partnering with than those Haitians who are fighting for dignity and true sovereignty.
So last year I saw that cholera has resurfaced in Haiti because they have a small supply of clean water. I also saw that there was a food shortage issue in Haiti. We have this issue with Henri. The people were protesting. They were heavily against him, and rightfully so. His response was basically just to tell the people, like, this is just how it is right now. You just have to kind of like deal with it. And then on top of that, over the past couple of years, the multiple earthquakes that have happened in Haiti that have also displaced people. And then we had Haitian migrants trying to come to the United States and Joe Biden to turn them away and telling them not to come here. I mean, how is this at this point in time? How is this not a human rights issue with everything that's happening with people there? I don't understand how, if you look at the UN, how do they not even see this as a human rights issue?
Good question, Sabby. Well, let's start with the cholera. It was the United Nations who brought cholera to Haiti. Haiti had never had a cholera epidemic until Nepalese soldiers brought it. They dumped their sewage in one of Haiti's main rivers that then spread throughout the country, and it killed more than 10,000 people. Haitians said, the United Nations brought this to our country and protested. The United Nations response, and you can look this up, was to gun down protesters in Cap-Haïtien, au Cap, Haiti's second largest city. And then what did they say? It wasn't us. It was intergang warfare. There's that intergang warfare again, right? That favorite cover-up that's used to cover up real objectives, real killing.
That was the United Nations response?
That's right. The United Nations gunned down protesters in Cap-Haïtien when there were massive protests against the United Nations trying to expose that they had brought cholera to Haiti. That's correct. And then they said that it was intergang warfare, that famous, brush off of intergang warfare. And then if we talk about Haiti's economy and people and food insecurity, again, the monopolists in Haiti are making money hand over fist because Haitians have money, because Haiti's GDP now is dependent upon remittances. More than 80% of Haiti's economy this year is going to be family and friends who are sending money to their loved ones to keep them alive. Haiti doesn't have an economy that's manufacturing anything or that's creating wealth from economically. It's people who are sending money to keep their loved ones alive. Well, where does that money go? Well, they have a monopoly that controls the importation of rice and beans, their staples, right? And cooking oil and tomato sauce. Well, it goes back into the hands of those few families that control that importation, the same as it always was, except now they're charging more money for it with inflation. Does the United States or do reporters talk about that at all? No. Am I making it up? Do your own research. I welcome people to do their own research. I gave you the names of those families earlier. People are relying upon one another. That's one of the things about, folks who don't have a lot, is that in order to survive, they have to rely upon one another to ensure their longevity. And more, that has brought Haitian communities tighter and more tight-knit than ever. They were once tight-knit before those two successive coups, but we've seen penetration and infiltration of Haitian communities by non-governmental organizations that deeply damaged those communities. Today, that tight fabric of interwoven families is being restitched as people are forced by the current circumstances to rely upon one another for survival. It's an amazing system. Each one feed one in many instances. But again, all of this is to create a dysfunctional society that I should say U.S. foreign policy and Canadian foreign policy would rather see a dysfunctional society that is slowly bleeding itself away than to permit any independent political trajectory that would alter the fundamental deal that the U.S. foreign policy has relied upon to maintain the status quo of U.S. foreign policy in that country by virtue of their relationship with this wealthy elite. They are still there. Although we have seen, so Canada sanctions the Bijou family. The Bijou family are billionaires, right? They were ultimately foreigners who relocated in Haiti and they took over parts of the economy. Well, Canada sanctions Bigot and clearly says that the Bigot family, is Gilbert Bigot. Before that, it was his father, Benjamin Bigot. But isn't it interesting that the United States doesn't sanction Bigot? Nothing. So the sanctions in Canada are toothless anyway. There's really no repercussions for those people on the sanction list. But then it really speaks volumes when Canada will sanction somebody like Gilbert Bigot, but the United States won't. Why? Because Gilbert Bigot is a large property owner in Miami, right? A large property owner in the United States. Again, this guy's got lawyers on K Street. He's got PR representatives. He pays millions of dollars to lobby Congress. He's golfing buddies with some of them, Democrat and Republican. They're not going to sanction him. These are long-term sweetheart relationships that have been going on for far too long. Haitians have known it. They've been speaking out against it. Jean-Bertrand Aristide's elections interrupted them, only end up in coup d'etats, but it is still the fundamental bedrock of U.S. foreign policy to maintain relationships with those elites.
That's interesting. It always goes back to the money. That's what I always tell people. It always goes back to the money. Considering history, do you think that France should provide some type of monetary compensation to Haiti?
Absolutely. That was one of the reasons that Jean-Bertrand Aristide was overthrown in 2004 was, he began in 2001 a campaign of reparations and began to strongly in 2003 ramped up that campaign to demand that France pay not only what the amount was worth when they stole that money, when they forced Haiti to pay the slave owners for them overthrowing slavery. I mean, talk about insult to injury, right? Not only do you have to battle these people to get them out of the country to end slavery, but then you've got to recompense them for having won, right? To the tune of what is now, estimated to be more than $25 billion. And Aristide was really the first one to call for those reparations. So you probably know that. There was this big expose in the New York Times, the ransom, which for the first time, very interestingly, actually told the truth. And actually called it a coup d'etat in 2004. Very interesting change in history or historical terms for the New York Times. If anybody who's close to watching the permutations of the New York Times. But absolutely, it was a correct demand then. It's an even more correct demand now, but it's not just France. The United States, our country, owes Haiti reparations for the political interference and the damage that we have caused by a failed U.S. foreign policy that has affected generations in that country. And we don't have to go back to 1915. We can start with the contemporary 2004 coup against Aristide, how it destroyed Haiti's democratic institutions, led by the Bush administration, the same Bush administration who lied about weapons of mass destruction, lied about Jean-Bertrand Aristide, lied to the world about what the real deal was in Haiti. It was not a popular revolt that overthrew him. It was Guy Philippe and Jodel Chamblain and paramilitary forces that were bivouacked in the Dominican Republic, who had brand new M16s and M50s, who came across the border. When the so-called opposition against Aristide, those demonstrations petered out, those guys came across the border, started killing the population, started killing police. They were the ones that the U.S. ultimately used as a pretext to then lie to the world and say that Aristide had resigned, when in fact Aristide did not resign and was unceremoniously taken out by U.S. Marines and the U.S. Charge d'Affaires, put on a plane and flown to Bangui, Africa. Bangui, the capital of help me here. Bangui. Oh, goodness gracious. I want to say Congo, but I think it was a Congo. Anyway, none of us had heard of it. Bangui before, unfortunately, but it's certainly on my geographical list today. They tried to keep him in exile. Patterson in Jamaica allowed him to come to Jamaica for a short period of time. The Obama administration objected, sided with the elite, sided with the coup d'etat, the putschists, and then he ultimately ended up in exile in South Africa. But the big lie that was the big lie of the Bush administration and U.S. foreign policy, was that this was a dictator who had fallen on his own sword, a man who was a former priest who had meant to do so many great things for Haiti, ultimately dissolved on the weight of his own corruption, which was a complete lie. You know, the successive U.S. administrations spent more than $30 million trying to pin the cocaine tail on the Aristide donkey, only to never have enough information or enough evidence to indict. No evidence. Aristide has never been indicted for either corruption or for drug trafficking, but that still remains their two big arguments today. Of course, that's on the right. On the left, of course, the argument is that Aristide sold out to the bourgeoisie, right? You talk to them, you know, some of these Marxist folks. Aristide was a sellout who ultimately cut deals, you know, that was against the class interests of the majority of Haitians. Simplistic analysis. What is Aristide doing today? My God, after all these piles of garbage that they have heaped on him, garbage character assassinations, what is Aristide doing? Well, just this Sunday, he had a graduation ceremony for more than 5,000 doctors, nurses, lawyers, architects at the Aristide University. 5,000 individuals graduating at that university who are all committed to social justice in Haiti. Since when have you ever heard a corrupt dictator ever doing that? I mean, historically, you know, of a country who took whatever, you know, and by the way, I can tell you how he raised the money. You can go to the Aristide Foundation website and you can see the list of donors. You know, the other lie, Aristide has $500 million, more crap. Yeah, I mean, it never ends. The other argument, Aristide, you probably never heard this one. This is by the former Haitian ambassador to Washington, and Washington loved him. He's a darling of theirs, Raymond Joseph, that Aristide had taken a baby and crushed it mortar pestle style and had himself bathed in the blood to reassure his election. I don't know if you ever heard that one. You can look it up though. Just pile upon pile of crap, you know, from the left, from the Marxist, so-called Marxist intellectuals who have very little information about what was going on back then and about why Aristide made some of the decisions he made, to the right who just manufacture stories. Yeah, I mean, it just never ends, Sabby. And so, you know, I have never looked at this struggle in Haiti as about Aristide, but I have seen so much trash that I have to say something. But most of my contacts, even during the time that I lived in Haiti, were always at the grassroots. I was the guy who was in the trenches with those folks during those protests, the only white guy there with a camera, often documenting the atrocities, the human rights abuses that were being committed against them after the 2004 coup. You know, I never, you know, but I have to say something only because the cognitive dissonance that is created between this graduation ceremony Sunday and all the trash they've heaped on that poor man, you know, just has to be called, you know, I have to speak to my own cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that one of the ongoing conflicts that I've seen also in reference to Haiti, there seems to be this ongoing conflict between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. I was just a couple of months ago, we reported on the Haitian residents that lived in the Dominican Republic. Some of them have been there for years, right? And so the Dominican Republic started to implement these new laws, which basically will remove the Haitians who have been living there for years. And there was a woman who was interviewed on Al Jazeera, and she was saying that her son was born in the Dominican Republic, even though they're Haitian, he was born there. And they were even trying to tell them that they were now not residents and that they needed to leave. So there were, I guess, like, it looked like hundreds of Haitians that lived in the Dominican Republic that were trying to find a way to stay there, and so that they're not booted back to Haiti. And to me, I felt like it was more of the rules that they put in place. It seemed like to me it was solely to target the Haitian immigrants that lived in the Dominican Republic, not people who seemed to who they refer to as illegal immigrants. To me, it seemed like it was solely targeted towards the Haitian immigrants. Why so much turmoil, do you think, between those two? Because they share an island. I kind of look at it as though, look, we're in this together, but it doesn't seem to be that way. It definitely seems like to me that there's a lot of conflict there. And Henry Louis Gates, he actually had a documentary about this when he went to the Dominican Republic and he went to Haiti, and he talked about this conflict as well. Is there seems to be no community between the two.
Well, only when it suits U.S. foreign policy. I mean, the U.S. embassy knew that Guy Philippe and Jodel Champlain and those paramilitaries with U.S. guns were in Haiti. I mean, we're in the Dominican Republic before they invaded Haiti to overthrow Aristide. The Balaguer government knew that they were there. It openly acknowledged that those Haitians were there. They didn't deport them. They didn't intervene to take those Haitians, armed Haitians, off their soil. Quite the contrary. They enabled them to invade Haiti to overthrow the constitutional government. So we can't look at the Dominican Republic and its racist policy towards Haitians outside of the context of U.S. foreign policy. The U.S. embassy still has tremendous sway in the DR, as it does in Haiti. The Dominican military has incredible relations, if you can look this up, through the IMET and other U.S. security programs, to the Pentagon. The U.S. Southcom has very close ties, particularly its leadership, to the United States military and the Pentagon policy. What you said was just the tip of the iceberg. You know, the Abinader government has the current president, Abinader, is pursuing a racist policy that is demonizing Haitians as the problem in order to divert the Dominican population away from its own problems and away from the corruption of his administration. That's how many Dominicans who I speak with that's how they portray it. And the level of racism you pointed out is not the worst of it. The worst of it is that today Dominicans will tell you that Haitian women are specifically coming into their country to give birth in Dominican hospitals to claim Dominican citizenship, right? Even though the majority of the Dominican economy depends upon those same Haitians to maintain their standard of living, whether that be their contribution as cheap labor to the DR's GDP, or whether that be the fact that the majority trading partner with the Dominican Republic still remains Haiti, right? A large part of the Dominican economy. So then you have to ask yourself, well, why is Abinader focusing on demonizing Haitians? And most of the folks in the left in the DR, or the human rights organizations, or the political organizations that have any real sensitivity around this issue that are anti-racist, will tell you it's to distract from his own corruption of his own government. It's to distract and demonize Haitians as the problem, rather than have them look at what the real problem is, which is that government itself.
It's the scapegoat. It's the scapegoat, because we do the same thing in the U.S. It's like, for the people who complain about the immigrants are here, they say all the Mexicans are coming here and taking our jobs, which they're not. For the people who say they need to leave the country, do they even understand what would happen to the economy here in the U.S. if that were to happen? I don't think a lot of people realize that.
No, who picks your grapes, right? Who picks your lettuce? You know, all the stuff, those jobs that Americans don't want to do. But you know, that raises another question, which is that there are also Haitians who were born here in this country who are also unceremoniously put on planes and flown back to Haiti and deported to Haiti, right? That's also happening. And then Biden's humanitarian parole has created such a mess for Haitians. It itself is an impingement on Haitian sovereignty, because thousands of Haitians are applying for Haitian passports to come to the United States to be sponsored by their loved ones and their friends, which is creating tension among them as well, between them as well, forcing that financial responsibility on their loved one and their friends for sponsorship. But also, it's creating this. If you looked at the images at the Haitian immigration offices, Haitians are literally willing to give up, many of the same Haitians who'd be in the streets today, except for the control of paramilitary gangs, are taking advantage of the safety valve that Biden has presented and offered, the humanitarian parole program, and they're clamoring and literally sometimes suffocating one another in line to get those passports to leave. It's creating huge divisions between Haiti's people who want to leave and the diaspora who they want to sponsor them to leave. It's creating divisions within Haiti as Haitians clamor and fight for a spot. It's the police are taking advantage of it. They're sexually abusing women to jump in the line. They're taking payoffs for people to jump in the lines. Biden's humanitarian parole program also means that those Haitians who have a legitimate reason to want political asylum based upon political repression, are being told the humanitarian parole program is your only avenue to enter Haiti. Mm-hmm. Well, that's just quite wrong. That flies in the face of the very reason that we allow people to declare political asylum and to take refuge in this country, because of political repression. So, and then again, you've got Canada patrolling the Haiti's coastline, not allowing people to flee by boat. You've got Biden's humanitarian program inside of Haiti creating havoc, having Haitians divided, fighting for their place in line. At the same time, you've got the paramilitary gangs displacing entire populations. Are you getting a picture of this, Sabby? What's painted here, right? This is the formula. Many Haitians do not believe that this is accidental, but this is a confluence of forces that is intentional in order to justify the overt. Right now, they have de facto control of Haiti politically by virtue of their boy, Ariel Henry, and government. What they don't have is control of the physicality of Haiti. But this confluence of those three things is giving them the perfect pretext and justification. And we're now even hearing, I was surprised to hear Daniel Foote yesterday on NPR now saying the people he's talking to in Haiti who were opposed to U.S. intervention or to foreign intervention are now, they're desperate to have somebody there. I don't agree with that, because most of the people I speak to, as difficult as it is, still do not want foreigners with boots on the ground in their country. But each day is a grind. Again, this is an intentional slow bleeding of Haiti's popular movement, of those people who have traditionally resisted U.S. foreign policy, who come from those poor neighborhoods, not only in the capital, but in Cap-Haïtien, in Okai, in Jérémie, in Saint-Marc, other large cities that also have their popular movements in the so-called popular neighborhoods. They are the ones who are the subject of this slow bleeding, because they are the ones who have traditionally been the heart and base of resistance to U.S. foreign policy in Haiti.
All right, Kevin, I have one more question for you, because I always have to ask, what is the end game? What do you feel is, at least the U.S. government, what do you feel their end goal is? What do they want to happen to Haiti? Do they want to, constantly suppress this country? Do they want to demolish this country? What do you feel is the end game?
Well, they rely on a lot of make-believe, right? They create organizations, structures in Haiti out of whole cloth. Just as to justify the 2004 coup, they created the so-called Council of the Wise, right? Which then appointed La Torture, Gerard La Torture, prime minister, who was in Boca Raton, Florida, who flew in and then took charge of the country for U.S. foreign policy. The Council of the Wise. Now, with the support of the U.S., they've created the High Transition Council, right? And the High Transition Council is going to create the new Conseil Electoral Provisoire, election council, right? But it's all make-believe. These are organizations that never existed within Haiti's constitution, have never existed in Haiti before. They're making them from whole cloth in order to justify a process to control the elections. That's the end game. They want elections because that's their panacea to say, oh, it's all democratic, and now let's give them all support, and now we're going to stabilize the situation, even though it's a repetition of an endless cycle that has ended. U.S.-sponsored elections have always ended in mayhem and more disarray and more division. But they're going to keep creating organizations like the Conseil du Sage, the Council of the Wise, the Haitian Transition Council, right? All these organizations that just seemingly come out of thin air that then they give legitimacy to, that are then, again, to oversee the electoral process, regardless of whether at the end of it, the Haitian population sees them as legitimate and credible. They're not going to have legitimate and credible elections in that country, and they should know by now, given the number of times they've tried this same formula. They're not going to have them again if they don't allow real Haitians who are not connected to the status quo politics of corrupt politics in that country, leading the charge, leading the movement to rebuild Haiti's democratic institutions, to stabilize the country before elections with noted, trusted figures in Haitian society. And it can be done. I know they keep saying, well, they've tried it and they, Haitians just don't seem to be able to get their act together. Well, every time they've gotten their act together and they've been independent, there has been an intervention. Somebody has showed up to knock it off its center and put it back in the direction that U.S. foreign policy demands.
Yep.
They don't just say, hey, we're going to get out of here and let you guys figure it out. They don't do that. They've got their fingers in the pot. They always have. Folks show up to make sure it goes in the direction that the United States and Canada want. So I'm not hopeful that anything is going to happen in the near future except this continual slow bleed. But I know that the Haitian diaspora throughout the world is resilient. It continues to support its loved ones and friends inside of Haiti who have those true intentions for real change in the country. So it's this race. How many of those people are going to die and fall versus how many of them can we support through real solidarity to keep them alive, to keep them in a position to continue demanding their rights and Haitian sovereignty and a real change in their country. I have no crystal ball, Sabby. I wish I did. All I can tell you is I know what won't work again, and that I know that the people who are there who can make it work continue to be there and continue to be resolute. And it continues to be this battle between who's going to determine the outcome of Haiti's future.
Kevin, thank you. Thank you so much. A wealth of information here. Where can people find you, Kevin?
Well, you can, I would suggest people go to Twitter. That's the main outlet that Haiti Information Project uses. It's at Haiti Info Proj, the @ HAITIINFOPROJ.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you. Like, guys, definitely make sure you're following Haiti Info Project on Twitter. There's a lot of information there. Thank you so much, Kevin.
My pleasure, Sabby. Have a great day.
Bye. All right, guys, I hope you learned something there. Kevin, again, follow Haiti Info Project on Twitter. Lots of videos, a lot of articles, like they are doing the damn thing. So definitely follow them if you're interested learning more about what's happening in Haiti. I'm going to go to some of the comments and then we'll move on to the other news stories. Thank you for the super chat. Roger, Sabby asked him about the guy named Barbecue. Yes, I did. I remember to do that. Johanna says Michael Martelly was the U.S. selected president. Jovenel Moise was his successor. Their role is to give over Haiti's treasure to the U.S./foreigners. Ashura is in the chat. John Bertrand Aristide was a better Black Bernie with a spine. I love it, Ashura. Pitchforks are coming, says Canada is aiding and abetting. And the Oracle says all roads lead back to the United States, 100%. This is why I always tell you guys, foreign policy is domestic policy, right? So you need to know about that as well. Okay. What else are we going to talk about tonight? Let me go ahead and share my thumbnail. Interesting stories coming up. That's all I got to say about that. Tonight, we are also discussing Brianna Joy Gray ponders Marianne Williamson's campaign strategy. So we're going to get into that discussion tonight because there were a couple of things that Brie said during that interview. She interviewed two of her campaign staffers that I felt like these questions needed to be asked. So we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to tell you what I think, what I would do if I were in that situation. We're also going to discuss Matt Taibbi visited by the IRS. So that is a big story. I saw that come across my way last night. We're going to talk about that, and you'll see Jim Jordan is in that picture with him. I'm going to tell you how he's involved in all of this. And we just talked to Kevin Pena about Biden and Trudeau Haiti intervention. And we're also going to discuss Stephen Dozinger blow. There's an update to that story, which is not the news that I expected to hear, and not the news I'm sure that Stephen wanted to hear, to be honest with you. But we're going to get into those. Quick shout out to all of you that are Sabby patrons. Let me go ahead and shout you guys out because you're doing the darn thing. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone who is a Sabby patrons. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories. All of their names are listed here. Members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. You can also see their names listed across the bottom of the screen. Thank you guys so much for your support. And I believe I need to update this. Yes, I shouted out Sonia and Lee for last time. I need to move them up in the column. But thank you guys. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate it. So, Matt Taibbi, Jesus, like the stories just keep coming. I'm not even kidding. Michael Schellenberger tweeted this out last night, and I think if you're not on Twitter, you probably have not seen this. So let's get into it. Michael Schellenberger tweeted, while Matt Taibbi and I were testifying before Congress on the weaponization of the federal government, an IRS agent showed up at his house. What an amazing coincidence. So let's all remember, let's recap here for a second. It was like two and a half weeks or so ago, Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger testified before Congress for the subcommittee hearing about the Twitter files and the information that they found. We talked about that. We discussed that on this show. So we talked about what a spectacle event that was. But apparently, while they were doing that, the IRS decided to make a visit to Matt Taibbi's house. Now, I have a video clip here I want to show you, because when I tell you about these government agencies, I'm not kidding around. Like, I just don't trust them. And that doesn't just mean the FBI, the CIA, the NSA. That also includes the IRS too. I don't trust them either. And I find it to be very odd that the day that he was testifying, they just happened to appear at his house. First of all, when does the IRS make house calls? Anybody? I've never heard of this. I've never heard of the IRS just showing up at someone's house, especially unannounced. So that's really bizarre to me. So when I tell you guys, when Matt Taibbi first dropped that very first Twitter file release, my response was protect Matt Taibbi at all costs. And this is an example as to why. Because I knew they were going to be coming after him based on the information that has been released. Now I have this clip here, so shout out to Case Study QB for this. Listen to this. Now, Fox News had a discussion about this particular situation. Let's get into it.
Effort to exercise control over the press. And so on that level, it's absolutely disturbing.
I believe the word is chilling. It chills free speech and coverage by journalists. An op-ed called out the newly beefed up IRS, remember, 87,000 extra agents. The fear of many Americans is that flush with its new $80 billion in funding from Congress, the IRS will unleash its fearsome power against political opponents. Mr. Taibbi deserves to know why the agency decided to pursue him with a very strange house call. Ben Dominant, Fox News contributor, editor-at-large for The Spectator. We should all pay attention to this one.
Absolutely, Harris. Look, I think that this is actually a layup for the President of the United States. President Joe Biden should come out. He should demand answers on why this happened. He should demand answers for why the IRS would engage in something that was clearly designed. I don't believe for a second that this was something that was coincidental.
I don't believe this was a coincidence at all either. It's the timing. It's the timing of it. And again, I am not familiar with the IRS just making these unannounced house calls. That seems very strange to me. I would expect the homeowner would have to agree to that in some way, shape, or form, or he would have been contacted beforehand. But I think everybody needs to be paying attention to what we said before about these government agencies and this type of overreach, where if you speak about something in a certain way that they find to be problematic, or if you reveal certain information that could implicate them, they see you as a threat. They see you as a target.
To go after Matt Taibbi on the day that he was testifying in front of Congress. He's a truth teller. He's someone who has been, a thorn in the side of major powerful entities in the United States for a long time by reporting the truth about them. And the fact that the IRS would go after him, would show up at his door. I think a lot of us have gotten, nasty letters maybe from the IRS over the years over something or the other, but we've never had somebody like that show up at your door. And I do think that this is a new thing that is going to happen underneath an IRS that is totally empowered, that has been funded to the nth degree by Democrats who believe that they ought to go after a lot of people who are engaging in totally normal behavior on all of the different exchange apps that exist.
Let's talk about this for just a second. Let's all remember it was the Democratic Party that decided to fund the IRS more. Remember that. That was just a couple months ago. They wanted to give them more money. They said, we need more IRS agents. To do what? To make house calls? What were they there for? What dirt were they trying to gather? Let me make very clear. They weren't there just to be there. They weren't there to drop off cookies and say, welcome to the neighborhood. They were there to see if they could try to find any type of dirt in reference to probably asset, wealth, financial information on Matt Taibbi to make his findings about the Twitter files to be less credible. That's what they were there for. Very, very strange times, man, I tell you.
On Venmo, on Cash App, et cetera, where they think that they could try to dig down into the income that people are making through those apps and find new ways to go after them. Matt Taibbi is obviously a Substack user, as am I, and he's someone who has been, a very popular newsletter writer for quite a long time. The idea that the IRS would send someone to his house over a dispute that apparently involves them owing him money is something that I just think is unbelievable. The president should demand answers from this, and he should demand answers from the IRS, and the person who did this or who enabled this should be have to answer for why they did and make clear why this was not just an act of political intimidation.
Yeah. And not just Joe Biden, but I feel like everyone, this is a particular situation where I feel like Democrats and Republicans should come together over and push back against this type of behavior. Because it can happen to any one of you. It doesn't matter. The IRS is not sitting back trying to figure out if you're a Republican or a Democrat. So you would think on this particular issue, you would think that they would actually have bipartisanship over pushing back against this type of overreach. It could happen to any one of them.
What they were trying to reach him for, according to a note that they left, was about his 2021 tax return and one in 2018, that those returns were rejected owing to concerns over identity theft. So it was like, oh, we're trying to help you out. We thought we'd come out. I mean, you mentioned it so beautifully. This is a layup for the president. If only he actually might know what that is. Your last quick thought on it, and we'll move forward.
No, I think that this is a situation where Democrat or Republican, people don't like the IRS, and they certainly don't like the idea of the IRS knocking on your door. I think that this is an example where the president, if this was not just a partisan, going after someone who, by the way, is left of center, Matt Taibbi, I think this is a situation where the White House should basically should engage in this question and find some answers so that we know what the basic issue is and why this ended up happening.
And we need to think about something else, too, that I want to bring up. Typically, a lot of times the IRS is mainly focusing on working class people. OK. They're usually not focused on, because if they were focused on wealthy people, then all these billionaires wouldn't have all these loopholes and these tax breaks that they're able to get around. And the IRS doesn't even pay interest to it. So you have to question it. Now, this article here from the Wall Street Journal says the IRS makes a strange house call on Matt Taibbi. This is crazy, man. I'm telling you, this is crazy. And there's Jim Jordan there. I'm going to tell you about Jim Jordan's role in all of this. Make it a little bit bigger there. Okay. Let me go right here. House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan sent a letter Monday to IRS Commissioner Daniel Werfel and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen seeking an explanation for why journalist Matt Taibbi received an unannounced home visit from an IRS agent. We've seen the letter, and both the circumstances and timing of the IRS on this journalist raise serious questions. Mr. Taibbi has provoked the ear of the Democrats and other journalists for his role in researching Twitter records and then releasing internal communications from the social media giant that expose its censorship and its contacts with government officials. This effort has already inspired government bullying, with Chair Lena Khan's Federal Trade Commission targeting new Twitter owner Elon Musk and demanding the company identify all journalists granted access to the Twitter files. So I want to highlight this here because these people are going to be targeted. They're going to have a target on their back. Just realistically, that's what it is. Now, Mr. Taibbi has told Mr. Jordan's committee that an IRS agent showed up at his personal residence in New Jersey on March 9th. That happens to be the same day Mr. Taibbi testified before the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government about what he learned about Twitter. The tax man left a note instructing Mr. Taibbi to call the IRS 4 days later. Let me get this straight, people. So the IRS shows up to your house. You're not there. They leave a note. Doesn't this sound a little bizarre to you? They didn't send an email, phone call. Mr. Taibbi was told in a call with the agent that both his 2018 and 2021 tax returns had been rejected owing to concerns over identity theft. 2018. 2021, I could possibly understand. But 2018, it's 2023. So for those of us who file taxes, I've been doing this for a long time. Usually you get an email notification that tells you if it's been rejected or accepted. I usually get that email pretty quickly after I've filed my taxes, right? Okay. So it's 2023 and they are now coming back and telling him that the 2018 is the one that's really suspicious to me. 2021 could be a possibility because it's within like that 2-year bracket. But 2018, let's go on. And they're saying it's because it's over identity theft. Okay. I don't believe that, by the way. I don't believe that at all. When you file your taxes, right, there's a couple of things they ask for. Obviously, your social security number. That's the big one, right? Whenever you want to go back and access that report, or whenever you want to access the IRS website to see if you're going to get a refund or how much you owe, you have to enter your personal information that they have, and it's supposed to match the information that they have on file. And if it doesn't, you can't get into the site. So I find it very strange that here it is 2023, and now they want to come back and say, oh, 2018 was rejected over identity theft. Really? All these years later? Mr. Taibbi has provided the committee with documentation showing his 2018 return had been electronically accepted. What do you know? And he says the IRS never notified him or his accountants of a problem after he filed that 2018 return more than 4.5 years ago. So like I said, this doesn't seem normal to me. Doesn't seem normal to me at all. And then, like I said, you have to question the timing of it. This is the same day when he had the hearing. He says the IRS initially rejected his 2021 return, which he later refiled, and it was rejected again, even though Mr. Taibbi says his accountants refiled it with an IRS provided PIN number. See, that's the thing I was telling you about when I said that you have to enter in information that matches the information that they have. And if you don't, like if you don't have that PIN number and all those things, you can't get in. Mr. Taibbi notes that in neither case was the issue monetary and that the IRS owes him a considerable sum. So that's the thing. They actually owe him money. The bigger question is, when did the IRS start to dispatch agents for surprise house calls? Typically, when the IRS challenges some part of a tax return, it sends a dunning letter, or it might seek more information from the taxpayer or tax preparer. If the IRS wants to audit a return, it schedules a meeting at the agent's office. It doesn't drop by unannounced. And that's what I was trying to explain to you guys. Because even for me, like in the past, I remember one time I did have an issue. I think I forgot to include my grad school stuff at that point in time. And they did reject it. And they were like, you got to do this. And I was like, oh, shoot, I forgot about that. So I added that too. And then it was accepted. And by the way, when it's accepted, it's like, it was quick. It was not something that took a month or years or anything like that. But I've never heard of the IRS just making surprise house call visit. That is very concerning. And it makes me wonder if that was actually an IRS agent that showed up to his house. The curious timing of this visit on the heels of the FTC demand that Twitter turn over names of journalists raises questions about potential intimidation. And Mr. Jordan is right to want to see documents and communications relating to Taibbi's visit. The fear of many Americans is that flush with its new $80 billion in funding from Congress, the IRS will unleash its fearsome power against political opponents. Mr. Taibbi deserves to know why the agency decided to pursue him with a very strange house call. We all have to remember about how these government agencies work. If you don't know the story about Fred Hampton, you'll know that they actually used an infiltrator. They had another Black man join the Black Panther Party, his chapter, to pretend to be one of them, and he was actually there to take them down. He was actually the one, I don't want to say poison, but he was the one who aided in subduing Fred Hampton so that he could be killed. So this type of behavior to me is very, very odd and strange. And you guys need to be wary of something like that too. There's this kind of scam that goes around where people have been targeted before by people who will say that they are IRS agents, and they will send them a text message or they'll call them on the phone and say, We need your help with this. And then they'll ask you for information, and the information that you give them actually helps them steal your identity, and you're actually giving them money without realizing it. You have to be very wary about that. The IRS will always, mostly always, respond to you with some sort of letter. Just like if you owe the IRS money, they will send you a letter that says this is the amount that you owe after you filed your taxes. You have to be very careful. There's a lot of scams that go on, and then some of these people could just be there to take you out. Now, I'm not trying to say that's happening to Matt Taibbi, but the timing of the visit is very strange, in my opinion. So we have to protect Matt Taibbi at all costs. I wasn't kidding when I said that when the first Twitter file dropped. Now, Matt has responded to this. He said, I've been reassured now that there's no problem, but I still look forward to hearing an explanation. Now, this was dropped earlier today, and I don't know who this is, but the New York Independent said could be Matt Taibbi is a tax cheat. He should release his taxes. And Matt responded and said, excuse me, what the hell is that? And learn to spell. Yeah, he misspelled his name there. And Matt was responding to here this tweet from Freedom of the Press, which says, if the IRS visit to Matt Taibbi's house had anything to do with his reporting or recent congressional testimony, it would be a disturbing attack on press freedoms. Let's hope the government quickly and credibly explains. And this is very true. Yeah, Susan, he deserves an explanation. Yeah. Also, what would have happened? See, this is the thing. Like, obviously, they knew he was testifying. He wasn't there. It wasn't a secret. And they showed up there while he wasn't there. What if someone else would have been there? What is happening here? This is an attack on freedom of press and freedom of speech. And this is something I continue to talk about because we really have to understand here what they are trying to do. I call that intimidation, showing up to someone's house the day they have the hearing. I call that some type of a threat, so to speak, showing up to their house the day that they have the hearing. I don't think it was a coincidence. Obviously, they still haven't issued an explanation as to why this happened, but somebody needs to explain something. Someone has some explaining to do. And that's my take on that. Scary times. And it's not just Matt, okay? Kim Iverson recently, she tweeted, because those of you who are not on Twitter, I don't know if you see some of these things, but Kim Iverson, who recently interviewed Alan Dershowitz. Now, this is the guy who was Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer, right? Okay, he wasn't too happy with Kim at the end of that interview. Apparently, he didn't want to come on there and talk about Jeffrey Epstein. You're Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer. What did you want her to talk to you about? Cereal? I don't know. So he got upset with her on air, and he said some things like, I'm never coming back here. You just sandbag your guests, yada, yada. Well, Kim asked him pretty legitimate questions about his involvement, which I thought was fair. Literally, after that interview, I think it was 2 days or so, she put on Twitter that the cameras showed that someone tried to break into her house. I don't know. This is what I'm saying. So that's why I don't think these things are coincidences. I'm sorry. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric, sorry. I always want to say Roger. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Usually when they make house calls, it's to take your shit. I'm thinking when Kutcher punked Timberlake pretending to be the IRS, or Red Fox got his stuff seized by the IRS. Right. It's not just to come by and like just pay a visit. Like, very strange, very strange. And again, I question the timing of it. Go to some of the comments here. Thank you for the super chat, Ron. Well, off topic, but can you please wish me a happy birthday? Happy birthday, Ronwell. Happy birthday to you. Outside Steelers fan says IRS works hard for the billionaire class. Thank you for the super chat, Jay. IRS should be going after Dr. Umar 14 years in school. Interesting. And thank you for the super chat. None of your business. Agent with USB drive to collect info from his Gior. I don't know what you mean there, but thank you. We're going to get into this next story here in reference to strategy. So Brianna Joy Gray had a conversation recently with two gentlemen that are working on Marianne Williamson's campaign. And I don't want to focus too much on the whole Marianne Williamson thing, but there's a particular question here in reference to strategy that I think is an important question. What is the strategy? And one of the things that Brie does bring up in this discussion as well, she brings up the question of whether or not they're trying to find a way to even appeal to those who are turned off by this process. So let's go ahead and get into this really quick. If you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and hit that like button, guys. Thank you. And we will do call in tonight. We're going to talk about that whole IRS issue because that is suspect to me. But let's go ahead and get into this discussion because the title is, Can Marianne Williamson Win? I am familiar with Carlos, by the way. Carlos, he ran for office as well. He's in New Hampshire. But listen to this, guys.
What is the solution in a place? I mean, because you've described a lot of particular obstacles in South Carolina. And I was thinking about, I forget the exact number, but it was something like 40, 50, 60% of Black voters in South Carolina said that the Clyburn endorsement was dispositive for them in voting for Joe Biden. Joe Biden has incredibly strong numbers for voters, Black voters over 60, voters, older voters generally speaking. There's something like 76% of all Black voters over 60 voted for Joe Biden. You've described the kind of time investments that are required to make a dent in the relationship structures that exist in South Carolina. So, you know, what is the plan to break through? Is Marianne planning to spend more time in the state? I guess it should have been started yesterday or a year ago, maybe even, but starting now at the very least. Like what do you see as the path to victory there?
So the question is, long story short, what is Marianne going to do differently that will convince voters in South Carolina to vote for her instead of Joe Biden? And having lived in South Carolina, I got to tell you, Jim Clyburn has a strong hold on the state. He has a lot of support, especially among Black voters in South Carolina. It was something I didn't understand when I first moved there. Like, people seem to have like this God complex about Jim Clyburn. I never understood it. I never got it. But it's kind of like whatever he says goes. And if he says you need to support Joe Biden, for the most part, that's what people are going to do there. So it is very tough in a state like South Carolina to break through if you do not have that support and backing of Jim Clyburn.
What do I see as the path to victory here is like having Marianne come, having people hear Marianne and actually listen, like Carlos was saying. When people are giving her a chance and like hearing her and seeing her and interacting with her, they're coming on board. And so you got to do that. It's kind of tedious work, but it works. It's old school politics. It's retail politics. You still got to do that down here in South Carolina. It's just a different group of people you're doing it with. So as long as you're doing that, putting that time in, talking to the people, hearing their voices, seeing how your Marianne's campaign can solve so many of our issues here if she were elected president, and having that conversation with these people, you build that trust. You get that same benefit that people don't have beforehand, because they're always so worried about Clyburn's machine that they're not putting into work to actually fight against the machine.
You think?
So here's the problem. I got to say something here. Bernie Sanders did all of that. Bernie Sanders did that when he was in South Carolina. He spoke to the people. Now, if you listen to Nick, my comrade from RBN, Nick canvassed in South Carolina for Bernie Sanders, and they were flipping voters, not just in the cities in South Carolina, but also in the rural areas, which I feel like a lot of times it's forgotten about when people are running these campaigns. But they were able to flip voters. The problem is the moment when Jim Clyburn said, we're going to elect Joe Biden, that changed the game. So to Brie's point, how are they going to beat that Jim Clyburn machine? All Jim Clyburn has to do is say support Joe Biden. And for the most part, that is what most Black voters in South Carolina are going to support. You have to understand that South Carolina has one of the oldest electorates. It's not like my state here in Massachusetts. You know, it's not like a New York. It's very different. So most of the people who are actually voting are older. And yes, more younger people are getting involved. But when it comes time to vote, most of the time in South Carolina, they don't show up the way that they did here in Massachusetts.
You think Bernie didn't? I don't mean this. You know, I want to know honestly what your perspective is. I'm happy to, criticize Sanders. You think that there was basically a sense of this is a fait accompli. I'm not going to make any headway here, so I'm just not going to make investments in the state.
I think what happened here during that time was it wasn't enough investment into that face-to-face field time. It's not that we did the wrong strategy. We just didn't do it enough because you need more. It's not. Like I said, we move slower here, so it takes a little bit more time for people to adjust. And a lot of people were doing the fast in and out, and it's a little bit slower.
I take that point, Mercurius, but I guess what I'm thinking is without any other kind of amplification, without the amplification of someone who's popular in the state who can offer their endorsement and kind of do that work for you by proxy, without having the media on your side that could amplify your message. I mean, obviously, Marianne can't meet however many million people live in South Carolina. So I guess I agree with you. And Carlos, you said this as well. My experience is that when people meet Marianne first face to face or see her in a speech or something, they radically will change their mind about how they feel about her. I saw she posted a video, in an interview that she did with the Griot yesterday or the day before. And not very many people have watched it, but all of the comments are uniformly positive. The Griot, of course, is a Black news site. And I see that over and over and over again. So I don't doubt that in the least. But my concern is, especially given the hesitancy of the DNC to allow there to be a debate, what are the opportunities for Marianne to get in front of enough people to actually make a meaningful electoral difference? And I want to welcome you back into this as well, Carlos.
So I will add a little bit to that. So before Carlos speaks, so getting to know people, getting to know community leaders gives you that trust that a local community leader might be able to move their 30 people better than Clyburn can because they have that. They're not in Clyburn's district. You don't see them. They're way out in some rural county like Lancaster, where Clyburn's influence isn't as much. But your local leaders are there. So when you're coming in and talking and you're meeting with those people, they give you that trust. They give you that network that kind of spreads out and snowflakes out that you can get to win here in South Carolina. It's maybe not different, but it's just people aren't trying to make those investments to meet with community leaders who know their community closer than electeds do, because
well, I understand that piece where he's saying you have to meet with the community leaders, but I'm just going to tell you again, having lived in South Carolina, my parents retired in South Carolina. I'm just going to go ahead and let you know, if she does not have that support of someone like Jim Clyburn, she is going to struggle in the state of South Carolina. What people have to understand is that, yes, you can meet with people as much as possible. Yes, maybe more of that needs to happen. Maybe more of that should have happened with Bernie Sanders' campaign when he went to South Carolina. But at the end of the day, if the person that a lot of voters, for whatever reason, still seem to trust Jim Clyburn, if Jim does not have their support, then the people who do vote are not going to trust a vote for Marianne Williamson, because they still look at someone like Jim Clyburn as someone who is a part of the community. He's from the community. He grew up there. They know him. And in a sense, some of them, and I've spoken to some of my friends there, some of them kind of look at like Marianne Williamson in a sense that they looked at Bernie Sanders as like, here comes this white savior to try to help us all. Now, that is not to say that's what Bernie or Marianne Williamson were trying to do, but it leads to the fact that people are more willing to trust a voice that's from their community versus someone who's an outsider who's coming in, who's trying to just get votes. So if you don't have that support from Jim Clyburn, it is going to be really difficult for her. This is also why I said, and I still stand by this, I think it was actually a mistake for Bernie Sanders not to even try to get Jim Clyburn's endorsement. I think that was a big mistake, having lived there myself. So we're going to go forward just a little bit here. This piece right here.
DeSantis. And people, especially historically marginalized groups, well, not all of them, Black people, because as Carlos mentioned, Latinos are putting out feelers and trying other kinds of strategies. But, you know, Black people feel as though the most important thing is to defeat the Donald Trump-esque person. And if they don't believe that Marianne Williamson is electable against those people, if they believe that Joe Biden is a proven quantity, and polls suggest as much, that no matter how much you convince people of what their personal needs are and how much more likely Marianne is to meet them, that they're still not going to come out and vote for her. I mean, what do you do about that? And does that seem to you to be as big of an obstacle as it seems to me to be?
So I'm not going to say that's not an obstacle, but like part of what we've been trying to do here in South Carolina over these last few years is overcome that. Like, it's talking about it, because that is a essential dread that people do have. But you got to show them the way that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that there's more ways to beat Donald Trump than with just Joe Biden. And what we haven't been doing is talking about that, making democracy and the issues that we're running on prevalent to beating the Republicans. So what we do is we say, Joe Biden is the only person that can beat Donald Trump. What you might need to do for some instances and say, the only thing that's going to beat the Republicans is doing this U-turn on our economic system. The only thing that's going to beat the Republicans is bringing universal health care to all of our people to fix our needs. So you change how the conversation is going and make it about Marianne's campaign, about what Marianne is going to do, and about the things that bring people hope, that they want to see, the benefits to that. And you stop making it about a Joe Biden versus Trump thingy or Joe Biden this. You make it as Marianne is our way to beating the Republicans. It's the way to be. You have to have that conversation. You have to take that step of faith forward for people to even to begin to think it is possible. But
the problem is that people are naturally going to ask, why is she trying to primary a sitting Democratic president? People are going to ask that question. And if people ask that question, you have to be able to respond to that. You can't just say, let's just focus on Marianne beating the Republicans. People genuinely are going to have that concern. Like I said, my parents live in South Carolina. Some of their friends are just kind of like, what the hell is Marianne Williamson trying to do? You know, now I believe that everybody should be able to run. Like, I don't even think this should even be an issue, whether or not Joe Biden should be challenged or not. However, I would say, knowing how the DNC is, knowing how the system works, I wouldn't run through the Democratic Party. I wouldn't run through the Republican Party. I think if you really want to be an outsider and you want to come in and dismantle the system, I think you need to run as an independent, or you need to run as a Green Party candidate, something like that, third party or independent. We will not See, the Democratic Party treat Marianne Williamson with the same type of respect that they're going to treat Joe Biden, even though the majority of voters right now said they don't want Joe Biden to run again. We're not going to see that happen. Just like we didn't see that happen with Bernie Sanders, right? Now, people say, well, they'll do that too if you're a third party independent candidate. Okay, yeah. But the difference is when you're running as an outsider, you expect them to treat you that way. When you're running in the same party and they treat you that way, you know the game is rigged. Like, you know they're working against you. That's a big part of the problem.
We are so focused on, I will say here, the negative stuff because we've been beaten down. It's the only thing we see. But we have to start looking at the positive stuff to get that energy, to get that light, to get that purpose going, that we can have a better democracy. We can have a stronger democracy. And the crossover appeal to that for people that are, we also have an open primary here. So the crossover appeal for that for other groups changes the electorate of who is voting. It changes who can be a Democrat. It changes who wants to be a Democrat by bringing Marianne into that. And so when you start doing that stuff, you bring in the traditional Democratic voters. You bring in the people who just don't like Biden.
Let me ask both of you about that then. Carlos, I'm going to come to you first. Are there efforts being made to attract independent and Republican voters? And do you see any appeal that the Marianne is having, any kind of demonstrated appeal among those groups?
That part is very important because let's remember Bernie Sanders didn't just have people who were Democrats that supported him. Bernie Sanders actually won the bulk of independents. When you compare him to Joe Biden, he had that support amongst the independents. Does Marianne have that support amongst the independents? Does she? Does she have any type of Republican support? And part of the problem is, like, if she is running on the same message, especially when we talk about foreign policy, if she's running on the same message as Joe Biden when it comes to foreign policy, yes, we're going to still give money to Ukraine. We're going to still give billions of dollars to Ukraine. Yes, we need to do a two-state solution in reference to Israel and Palestine. If she's running on the same, then some people are going to look at it and say, then what is this all for? That's part of the problem.
I have to say, I also want to address your first question about your listeners, viewers, maybe not being so excited about the Democratic Party. I can agree. I'm not excited about the DNC. I don't think anybody could be under the circumstances that we're living today. I'm excited about my party here in New Hampshire because we tend to do things much different than the DNC. And it's the obvious reason why they don't want us to go first. That is very crystal clear. So I'm not asking anybody to be excited about the DNC. What I'm asking them is to take control of their local parties. That's where the power is. That's where we're going to make change. That's how we're doing it here in New Hampshire. You know, I was able to win my election a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to be the first Latino on that rules committee ever in the state of New Hampshire. And
he could have left that out. Oh my God. He could have left that out. Taking over the Democratic Party in your state, I think the problem with that as well is we have a recent example to look at, and that's Nevada. We saw what happened. Didn't Democratic Socialists take over the Democratic Party in Nevada? And then what happened? What happened? They've been booted out. They just boot them out and say, no, this is not going to work. That's the thing. Like, some of the things that are being proposed, we have recent examples to point to show that that is not effective, to show that that's not working. And for Carlos to say, and I know who Carlos is, I've seen him run before, for Carlos to say, well, I'm going to be the first Latino to be on the, okay, but I don't really understand what that has to do with Marianne Williamson's campaign. You see the problem? Like, it just, I don't know. Like, I felt like that's a Democratic Party talking point. I'm going to be the first this, I'm going to be the first that, without explaining how you're actually going to help the people.
We're breaking barriers everywhere in New Hampshire. We just elected in a very red town a transgender man who's actually working for Marianne, who was an Elizabeth Warren supporter before. You know, I was a Bernie supporter before. We have somebody else from the Tulsi campaign. And this is an interesting point. We have people from all these camps that worked on all these different campaigns before joining Marianne. And Marianne has an ability to talk to Americans, not to talk specifically just to Black voters or to Hispanic voters or to Indigenous voters or to gay voters. She has an ability to speak to American voters. And that's something that she emphasizes a lot. And I think she's just different. She's able to attract those people. Also, Americans are tired of voting for the less of two evils. That is very crystal clear.
Look, guys, I appreciate all of this. And certainly.
Yeah, I hear all of this. That Americans are tired of voting for the lesser two evils, but Americans continue to do it because as long as you have that fear of we could get Donald Trump again, or we could get Ron DeSantis, who I actually think would be worse than Donald Trump, in my opinion, as long as there is that fear that's coming from mainstream media, which does drive the narrative, people continue to vote blue no matter who. They continue to support, they'll continue to vote for Joe Biden because they're afraid of getting Donald Trump, because they're afraid of getting a Ron DeSantis. So when he says Americans are tired of doing that, are they tired enough to break the cycle though? Are they tired enough to stop voting for the duopoly altogether and supporting third party and independent candidates? Are they tired enough to do that though?
You know, I guess I'm pushing back because I think that people don't want to, at least in this context, people listen to this episode, they are more familiar with Marianne, the average voter. They don't need to be convinced of what she stands for. Some people disagree with some of what she stands for. They disagree with some of her foreign policy takes. They agree with other parts of her or her domestic agenda or whatever it is. But the concerns are not about that. Ultimately, people, except for some people who I think the foreign policy stuff is a deal breaker, put them to the side. That's their choice. Other people are like, why should I invest in this again? Why should I give my donation to this again when the system is so rigged, unless I'm being given like demonstrable changes in strategy that are likely to have a different, to create a different outcome. So that's what I ask you, you know,
I'm one of those people.
Are there,
we're not going to
what's going on? You know, are there efforts being made? You know, is appealing to independent and Republican voters really a part of the strategy that's going to help in these open primary states? And if so, what does that look like? What is the infrastructure that's being put into effect on the ground in South Carolina that enables Marianne's time spent in the state to be most effective? Are there going to be efforts to try to meet with people like Jim Clyburn, who Bernie Sanders kind of famously said, I don't want to shake hands and wish happy birthday. Maybe that hurt him in certain parts of the country. Does Marianne have a different approach? When you say about New Hampshire, Carlos, that they do things differently there and they're not quite so beholden to the kind of these national politics, and you've said the same thing, Mercurius. What specifically does that mean? Help the listeners understand what opportunities you see, because I think that's on some level going to be much more persuasive to them than this idea that Marianne appeals to a lot of people. Like, we got that. Like, people know that. People here are familiar with Marianne.
I don't mean to be boring.
No, it's not. It's not about you being boring. I just want you to make the best case to this kind of different audience than a normal audience, the more generalized audience that you are usually talking to.
The strategy in New Hampshire is not much different than what we did for Bernie, because it worked.
That's a problem. So he said the strategy in New Hampshire is not much different for what we did with Bernie because it worked. That's a problem. And I'm going to explain to you why it's a problem. I look back on it and I think that Bernie Sanders' strategy for 2020, at that point in time, I thought that was a great strategy, whereas a lot of other candidates, they were focusing on these key primary states. Bernie Sanders traveled all across the country. Bernie Sanders came here to Boston, Massachusetts, and he really did not really need to come here. Like, just to be honest with you, like, some people are like, why would he go to a place like Massachusetts? It's not like he needs a boots there or whatever, but he traveled all across this country. I felt like that was a great strategy. And even he couldn't get there. Even he couldn't win because the DNC, the media, Obama, all of them came together to find ways to make sure that Bernie would not get the nomination. And that would have happened regardless if there was a Trump or if there was a DeSantis on the other side. That would have happened regardless, because they didn't want someone to get through that was going to say, yeah, everyone needs to have healthcare in this country. They didn't want that to happen. They didn't want that to happen. So if Bernie did all of that, traveled all across this country, at one point he raised the most money from individual working class people, and he could not get there. Why does Carlos think that using that same strategy that they use with Bernie Sanders with Marianne is going to help Marianne get there? And she's less popular than Bernie Sanders. Based on what I've seen so far from this discussion, it seems like to me they don't really have a different strategy. And if you don't have a different strategy, how are you going to be able to disrupt the system that is in place that is preventing anyone running on these progressive policies from getting in that seat in the White House? I think what they should be doing is looking back on what they did with the Bernie strategy and seeing what they could change. But just, we're just going to use the same strategy we used for Bernie Sanders, and Bernie did not get there. Let's go on.
And progressive won. So there's no reason to change the wheel. New Hampshire is not looking for change. New Hampshire just wants the DNC to mind its business and let us conduct our primary. And I can only speak to what we're going to do here in New Hampshire. We have the infrastructure in place. We have phenomenal staff that are very experienced, that come from different progressive wings within the progressive wing and Democratic politics. We are attracting independent voters. There's even libertarian voters that like how Marianne speaks about government and just less government in general. And there are voters in New Hampshire.
That's interesting, because I've interviewed libertarians, and particularly libertarians in New Hampshire, and they are definitely not for these progressive policies. They do not agree with Medicare for all. They're not for these progressive policies. So that's interesting that he's saying that.
New Hampshire is very independent. There's a lot of veterans in the state of New Hampshire who actually don't disagree with Marianne's foreign policy, especially when it comes to Ukraine. As a progressive and as a Democrat, I actually don't disagree with Marianne on Ukraine. I know that's a controversial subject on some progressive politics. Sorry, I cut out there for a second. But I have to say, in New Hampshire, none of those things are a deal breaker. I think the only obstacle we have here in New Hampshire, people are asking, they want somebody with experience.
But she doesn't have the experience either. So that's why I push back on this, because first of all, we have to remember New Hampshire is not representative of the rest of the country. So we have to remember that. That's my north neighbor, New Hampshire. It is very different from Massachusetts, and it is not representative of the rest of the country. It's a very different place. I will say that. But he says he wants someone that has experience, but she doesn't have that experience.
Have been doing a much better job at presenting New Hampshire voters to Marianne to make sure that they understand Marianne's background in community work, in churches, in with the HIV/AIDS crisis in the 80s. These are important facts that the media has been trying to hide or twist or misrepresent. And so we've been doing a much better job at just making sure that people, Granite Staters here, understand her background and all the experience that she brings to the table.
Well, that's a great example, Carlos. I'm glad you brought that up.
If you've been in DC for your whole entire career, that's not experience. And that's actually not what we need. Joe Biden, the only thing he has to bring to the table is the fact that he's been in Congress his whole entire life. Why do we want more of that?
I'm glad you brought up that particular example of we've gotten a little early taste of the strategy that is likely to be deployed against Marianne. The Women of the View last week, or maybe it was the week before, covered her campaign, and Sunny Hostin in particular accused Marianne of having been dismissive of the AIDS crisis, arguing that she didn't, thought that people could self-heal or something like that, in a way that I think pretty egregiously misrepresented her record of offering spiritual support to people who were dying from that crisis and being ignored by the government, generally speaking, as that crisis was ongoing. Strategically, The View is a huge platform. And And given the barriers that we've discussed already to Marianne accessing other kinds of large platforms like a debate stage, what kind of discussions have there been about how to push back against that, especially since so much of left media also is not, frankly, very supportive of Marianne? Much of it is, obviously, but some of it isn't.
So here's the people who have said they're not supporting it so far, besides RBN. Sam Cedar doesn't support it. He said on stream he doesn't support it. I don't know about TYT. They seem a little like they didn't seem like they were really feeling it. Then you also have that group called the Left Mafia. They weren't feeling Marianne Williamson. And one of the things I noticed about this space, it seems like if TYT is not on board for the candidate, then it seems like a lot of the progressive voters are not on board with it either. And based on that interview I saw with TYT, with Marianne, Jink, and Anna, they didn't seem to be feeling Marianne like that. The fact that people even have to try as hard as they are to push Marianne on the left, and I'm not talking about people who are not a part of the progressive space. I'm talking about the fact that people have to try this hard to convince other progressives to support Marianne Williamson. That in itself lets you know that this is not the one. That in itself, nobody had to try this hard to push and to sell Bernie Sanders to other progressives. People got behind Bernie because of his message and because of his passion and because he spoke from within his soul. It felt like you believed Bernie Sanders. He traveled all across this country. It didn't seem like a vanity project at that point in time, but I didn't have to be convinced to support Bernie Sanders. The policies stood on its own, and I believe the passion behind his voice. Now, we can go back and say a lot of things about Bernie Sanders now. Obviously, those things did not transpire, and we see him for who he really is. But the point that I want to drive home is, again, the fact that they have to try this hard to convince other progressives to support Marianne Williamson and that Marianne is a viable candidate, that is the big red flag. If a lot of other progressives are not supporting Marianne Williamson running for president, that speaks volumes to me. It should not be this hard. That's the thing. It should not be this hard. And I'm going to show you in just a second, I'm going to show you a clip that is one of the reasons why I feel people are not taking it seriously. And part of it is because of who's pushing it. Because see, some people forget that Marianne ran for president in 2020. And some people have forgotten what some of those same people who are pushing Marianne Williamson right now, some people forgot what they were saying about her when she ran in 2020. And so we have to look at it kind of suspect as to why you all in for Marianne now, considering the things you said about her when she ran in 2020. Let's go on.
So strategically,
I think we've done a great job at making sure that these gay people that were directly affected during the AIDS crisis and HIV crisis, I wasn't born during that. I was born in '89, so it was that happened before my time. But what I can tell you is we're putting people in front of Marianne and we're bringing these people on board, these people that were maybe silent last time when she ran that are now coming up and speaking up. There's a beautiful video that we just put out of this person giving a testimony about his relationship with Marianne and him living through the AIDS crisis and the influence that Marianne had on him. And the fact that it is not true. Marianne never told any of these people, do not take your medication. So that's what we're doing. We're letting voters choose for themselves. You can hear it from The View, which is an entertainment source, and you can take it for whatever you want. Or you can take it directly from the person that is being affected or was affected during those times. And that's really, this is the type, we know, Bernie used to say this, the revolution is not going to be televised. And we have learned some valuable lessons from 2020 that we know that the media is not going to give us, at least the CNN and MSNBC is not going to give us a fair shake. But that's fine. Voters in New Hampshire are not taking making political decisions based on CNN, MSNBC, or The View for that matter. They're making decisions based on their interaction with the politicians that are coming here and the people that they're listening to. People like.
But the majority of Americans are making their decisions based that way. Let's just be realistic. The majority of Americans are basing it off of what they hear on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. That's just the reality. Like I said, New Hampshire is a different place. New Hampshire is a different type of place. Let's fast forward here, because I want to speed up to this part, the debate stage.
To debate Biden because we will make the case at the stage. And I think that's partly another reason why they don't want to debate Marianne. She's going to bring the receipts to the table and we have no problem. And we have so many people, even that political article that came out, which I thought was a low blow. Just basically, we have tons of staff speaking up saying they loved working with Marianne. They still love working with Marianne. I've had a couple of people call me and say the same thing. They're like, are you okay? I'm like, I'm perfectly fine. She is like any other boss. She tells me what I need to do, but I also tell her, hey, this is what we need on the ground. We have a great time on the campaign trail. The energy's there. We're enjoying the campaign. And I have so many voters coming out. We had voters last time she was here during a snowstorm. There was a state warning that there was going to be this giant blizzard coming, and people still came out. We had people that didn't agree with Marianne show up. And still the level of civility and conversation that happened in that room is admirable. And it's what the American public is ready for.
Well,
so
let me ask you about
skepticism, but
let me ask you about that, guys. Since you brought it up, for those who don't know, there was a political article last week titled "Marianne Williamson's Abusive, in quotation marks, Treatment of 2020 Campaign Staff Revealed." In it interviewed 12 people, I'm reading from it now, who worked with Williamson during her 2020 presidential campaign, paint a picture of a boss who can be verbally and emotionally abusive. A staffer said, quote, "It would be foaming, spitting, uncontrollable rage." I mean, what is your guys' reaction to that story? Do you know anything about the sources and what's going on there?
Yeah, one of the sources that spoke up happens to be somebody from New Hampshire. And I don't want to really get too much into details. This is somebody that I actually admire and have a lot of respect for. And I'm not here to question victims. I'm always about believing victims, whatever they say. But that said, just those comments alone, would we say that about somebody like Joe Biden? Would we say that about Barack Obama? We would never say that about a male figure. So, those words that they use, as a man, I'm actually offended for women in this country that this is how.
Yeah, I totally understand that point that he's bringing there, that people are more likely to do that against like women than men. But the question that I have is, did it happen or not? I mean, is that true? This isn't the first time that this has been brought up. If you watch the interview, or not the interview, the segment recently with Due Dissidents, they actually talked about this, that apparently even back during when she was working with patients during the AIDS crisis, apparently there was an article that was released back then that also mentioned how some of these same things that are said to her, about her in that political article, there was an article released back then talking about her treatment of people and her behavior. So this is not a one-off. Go watch the video with Due Dissidents. I'll see if I can find it. Watch the video with Due Dissidents where they pull up the article from when she worked with patients during the AIDS crisis. It was the same sentiment as what you saw in that Politico article. Now, this is not to say that these articles like Politico are not going to come and smear people. They're going to. They did this to Bernie Sanders too. They said that he was like, it was like racist, sexist, like that kind of stuff. They did that to Bernie too. But if this happened more than once, then I see it as a pattern. So was it false both times or just this time? So the question is, like Carlos says, he knows one of the people that came forward in that article who actually lives in New Hampshire. So this is one of them is someone that Carlos knows. But my question is, again, did it happen or did it not?
How we speak of.
I mean, so Carlos, I definitely think that we have seen on video Joe Biden behave in ways that I would describe as foaming, spitting rage. Like we saw him jab his finger in the chest of that was some kind of like plant in the 2020 race and antagonizing this guy in a hard hat. We've seen him say "listen, fat" and challenge one of his critics to push-ups because he got so angry. We know that he's had a number of Me Too allegations made against him, et cetera, et cetera. But I would also say that some people are gonna think, well, even if we wouldn't hold a man accountable for behaving badly, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't hold women accountable for behaving badly. So, I mean, what do you say to people who have some concerns about this?
I mean, I'm a younger generation where I don't see gender, I don't see color, I don't see sexual orientation. I treat everybody how they treat me, and I can only speak to my experience. I am not here to discredit any of the victims. I don't believe in doing that. I think that's when they go low, we go high. I can only speak to my experience.
Okay, let's get into, because I want to show you something here, because I have memories. I do have a good memory. Oh, where did that okay, that one's not up. Let me put that one up. We need to talk about something here. First and foremost, one of the things that was discussed was what is like the strategy. Carlos said the strategy is to use the same one they did for Bernie Sanders. I don't think that's a good idea because, like I said, Bernie traveled all across this country. He was one of the most popular candidate that was running, actually. And even Bernie couldn't get there, right? Because of the system that's in place. So the strategy needs work. The other thing that I've noticed is that people who are not taking it seriously, some people are like, this is not serious, this is yada, yada. There's a reason for that. There's a legitimate reason for that. And one of the reasons is the fact that some of the same people who are pushing Marianne Williamson now, they are using some of the same smears that The View used towards Marianne. Some of the things that people are saying about Marianne now, mainstream media, the crystal ball thing, the hippie kind of, that type of energy, mainstream media is using those smears against Marianne now. I just want to remind you that one of the people who's heavily pushing Marianne right now used those same smears against her when she ran in 2020. And this is one of the reasons why some people are not taking it seriously. Now, this is from 2020 election. This is Kyle Kalinske. The name of this video is Marianne Williamson deletes a very dumb tweet, then doubles down. The point of this is not about the tweet. The point of this is the way that he describes her in this video. Listen to this.
So Marianne Williamson tweeted and then deleted the following. The Bahamas, Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas may all be in our prayers now. Millions of us seeing Dorian turn away from land is not a wacky idea. It is a creative use of the power of the mind. 2 minutes of prayer, visualization, meditation for those in the way of the storm.
Now, does Marianne no longer believe in prayer and meditation? No, she still does, right? Okay. Listen to this.
Now, you could see why she deleted it, because that's the silliest thing I've ever heard in my life. I want to repeat part of it here. Millions of us seeing Dorian turn away from land is not a wacky idea. It is a creative use of the power of the mind. No, it's not. It's called hoping some shit happens that will have no discernible effect on reality, empirically. So now listen, don't get me wrong. If you want to do such a thing, am I against it? No, you can do whatever the hell you want to do. I don't care. You want to wish away the storm? By all means, go right ahead. The thing that is not okay is this idea that, like, it'll have any effect. Because we know it won't have any effect. We know that this nonsense, like, the power of the mind, yes, that's, absolute trash. That's, like, hippie, mystical thinking, energy.
Wait for it.
Crystals, chakras, nonsense.
Isn't that the same thing? The same thing that mainstream media is saying about Marianne Williamson right now? Do you guys see the problem? This is why some people don't take it seriously. Because let's be clear, Kyle Kulinski, who is a big, big, heavy pusher of Marianne Williamson's campaign right now, let's just call it what it is. He was one of the people who used the same type of rhetoric that mainstream media is using against her right now. He used that same rhetoric when she ran in 2020. That's why some people don't take this as a serious thing. So now all of a sudden, I'm supposed to believe that all of a sudden Kyle Kulinski 100% believes that Marianne Williamson is the one. After all those videos in 2020 where he called her crazy cuckoo lady, crystals lady, all that stuff. Now I'm supposed to believe that he did a complete 180 and believes that she can get to the spot that Bernie Sanders weren't supposed to get to. Make it make sense, people. Make it make sense. I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. There is some type of other energy happening here with this. There really is. To me, it's just like replacing that Bernie mark, right? You have to have someone replace that Bernie campaign. Who can we insert in this spot to keep this going? And Due Dissidents was spot on about this. Now they'll be on next week. Let me fast forward because the part that I want to show you that letter. They were talking about, here it is, right about here. Listen to this.
Other people is she yells and she's mean and she's not the kindest to her own staffers, which again, she categorically denies. Now, by the way, there's all this anonymous. There's one person in the article that they actually like.
Okay, hang on. So here again, he is grossly misinforming his audience. Why is it anonymous, Kyle? Why is it anonymous? Well, we have a portion of that Politico article to explain why it's anonymous. We got into this a little bit with the NDAs. Williamson feared that her staff would go behind her back and talk to reporters about her behavior, according to 6 former staffers who said she required campaign employees to sign non-disclosure agreements and made clear that they would be strictly enforced.
Now, by the way, Kyle Kulinski never mentions that in that segment that they were just showing you. He doesn't bring this up. He also doesn't show the article, which is suspect. When do you see me, guys? When do you guys see me not show the articles? When do you see me not do that?
At one point in 2019, she suggested monitoring staffers' phones, according to one of them, but never followed through with the idea. Williamson denied that she ever suggested doing such a thing.
Now, let's fast forward to the part where he shows the other letter. You make sure that's Politico. Because not Keaton, but the other guy, he was the one, this one, right about here.
And Germany, because, you know, they had a little problem about 70 years ago. Let
me make sure I got the right.
United Europe. We support the.
Not that one. I'm just making sure I'm getting to the right letter.
Just mentioned.
No, that's the foreign policy part. Sorry, I'm speeding through the video. I might have passed it already. It's the piece where he brings up the conversation.
He's just
about the AIDS crisis, because there was another release. That's 2018. Let's go back. Sorry, guys. I'm just making sure I got the right one. This may not be the one. I thought this was the one. That's denying throwing the phone. I'm not sure I'm on the right video now. I thought this was the one. Anyway, I thought it was this video where they showed the article. They started talking about working with the AIDS crisis. And then he was talking about how there was an article back then where she had the same complaints. This is the one.
Caused grumbling in the ranks. One staffer, the Manhattan Center's board director.
Okay, yeah, this is the one. This article is from 1992. So listen to this.
Contract and later settled. Quote, Marianne is someone who likes to control everyone around her, said journalist Jean Halberstam, formerly on the Manhattan Center's board. Let's look at the People exhibit. Is this just a random quote from the LA Times? Is this only one source? Her treatment of other loyal employees has also caused grumbling in the ranks. One.
Okay, this is from People magazine, March 9th of 1992.
Staffer, the Manhattan Center's board director, Regina Hoover, was put on probation with Williamson's consent last year, 1 week before Hoover's scheduled double mastectomy. A short time after her surgery, Hoover was fired, then forced to haggle for months over the terms of her medical insurance. Oh, yeah, she's a saint. Quote, Marianne's ego is all over the place, says a worker at the LA Center for Living who wishes to remain anonymous. When she's mad, it's like watching a 3-year-old throw a tantrum.
Now, people can change, right? People can change over the years. This does happen. But it points to a pattern. This is not the first time that she has been accused of having that type of behavior. So that tells me there's a pattern. That's going back to 1992. Something to think about. I'm gonna go to some of the comments. If I don't know what type of strategy they're really trying to do, but this whole strategy of following what you did with Bernie, I think is a bad idea. Because like I said, he was very popular and even he couldn't get there in the end. But if I was Marianne Williamson, I would be focusing on my strengths, the areas where I'm strong. And one of her top, policy pieces when she was running in 2020 was on reparations. And I've seen lots of interviews with Marianne, and I don't see that many people even bring that up. Like Nick and I, we brought that up when we interviewed her. If I were Marianne, I would be focusing on the key areas where I am very strong. And I would take the time to learn about the areas where I need to improve. But just going on to people's shows and just being like this middle of the road conversation that she had with Glenn Greenwald, it's like, you got to stand for something or you will fall for anything. What do you stand for? This is a question anyone should ask themselves if they are running for office. What do you stand for? If I close my eyes and you say, what's the first thing you think of when I mention Bernie Sanders? If we're back in 2020, things will be different now. Back during 2020, Sabrina, what's the first thing when you think of when I say Bernie Sanders? Boom, Medicare for all. Don't even have to think about it, right? Don't even have to think about it. What's the first thing that you think of when I say Marianne Williamson? Put it in the chat. What is she running on? What is her key policy position? This is very important. What do you think of? Tell me. If you have to stop for more than 15 seconds to think of something, what does that tell you? James said, drawing a blank. Ozzy said, Hamilton. Okay. Anthony, incense and peppermints, moon crystals. Do you see the problem, guys? Bryce says support for Ukraine and Israel. Lee says, I got nothing. Kenneth Orb. Kimberly, taxing corpse. Lou says idiocy. Black Zen says mansplaining. Giovanni says absolutely nothing. These are not good. You see the problem? Otherwise, people just going to see you as no different than the other guy. You find the areas where you are strong. You focus on your strength. I learned this from a previous supervisor of mine a couple years ago. You focus on the key areas where you are strong, and you take the time to improve on the areas where you are weak. But when you go onto these interviews, You focus on your strengths. And I feel like a lot of these interviews that I've been seeing, I don't feel like that's happening. I don't. But that's just my opinion. Let me go to some of the comments here. Thank you for the super chat, Justin. Part of the problem, there are so many problems with her campaign. My prediction, no nomination and 0 votes in the general election. Such a bad idea. Thanks, Chris, for the super chat. I wish Brie would come out more forcefully about abandoning the party. Entertaining ideas of taking over the party seems to be backtracking to me. Well, I think Brie votes green in the general, right? I think she votes green in the general. Thank you for the super chat, Graham. Medicare for all voters should negotiate with Trump. Opinion. That's interesting. That's interesting, Graham. Thank you for this super chat, Justin. Dem party primaries are designed to prevent good candidates from getting on the ballot. A Green Party candidate is more likely to be elected than a progressive seeking the Dem Party nomination. That's why I'm like, if you're really going to go all in, man, you might as well just go complete outsider. Thank you for the super chat, The Traveler. Back in 2016, Clinton had complete control over the DNC's finances way before a vote was made. Who will control the DNC's finances in 2024? Because it seems like a conflict of interest. That's a good point. I'm actually going to see if I can bring Nico back on to talk about the DNC fraud lawsuit. Thanks for the super chat, Roger. Maybe try hiring the Marianne stand from Colin. You're funny. Thank you, Kevin. Every generic Dem talking point right there. Thank you, Roger. He made fun of crystals until he got him one. You're funny. Thank you, Justin. You can't make it make sense, Sabby. These people are insane. Oh, man. I just hate to see people get their hopes all up again. I'll take the comments on Rockfin, Eric, and then I'll go to the next story. Thank you for the tip, JVB. Sabby equals brilliance. And thank you for the tip, Roger. Brie should have been screaming DNC fraud lawsuit, reveal DNC fraud lawsuit, reveal DNC fraud lawsuit, reveal. What will you do about that? All this means nothing if that's not addressed. Also, South Carolinian millennials and Zoomers need something to vote for. Sadly, they are not a CBI state for them to have something to come out. So we don't get a true reading on where they are issue by issue. That's a very good point. That is true. We don't. Okay, let's get into this story here about Steve Dozinger. I don't know if you guys have been aware, but there is an update in reference to his particular situation. So Steve Dozinger, obviously, he's been on house arrest because of his fight with Chevron. Now, he did sue Chevron. This is a big ordeal. The Supreme Court actually came down with the ruling yesterday, which is not good for Steve Dozinger. It's just the reality of the situation. But before we get to that particular update, I want to take you back just a moment to remind you of how he got here in the first place. You have to go back to this interview that he had with Democracy Now!, where he basically was the one that exposed Chevron, the Amazon oil spills that Chevron had, which also contaminated indigenous land, indigenous peoples, communities. And Chevron, this is a wealthy company. They're huge. And they didn't want to pay these people for the damages that they had done. Steve Donziger, on the other hand, seems like he was the one who was more severely punished because they put him on house arrest for 3 years. Let's go back to that moment.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. If you'd like to get our daily digest, you can get it emailed by texting the word Democracy Now!, one word, to 66866. That's Democracy Now! To 6. Behalf of 30,000 Amazonian indigenous people for dumping 16 billion gallons of oil into their ancestral land in the Ecuadorian Amazon. 10 years ago, Ecuador's Supreme Court ordered Chevron to pay $18 billion. The landmark ruling was seen as a major victory for the environment and corporate accountability. But Chevron refused to pay or clean up the land. Instead, Chevron launched a legal attack targeting Donziger. Last month, a federal judge found Donziger guilty of 6 counts of criminal contempt of court after he refused to turn over his computer and cell phone. In an unusual legal twist, the judge appointed a private law firm with ties to Chevron to prosecute Donziger after federal prosecutors declined to bring charges. Today marks 2 years, 730 days since Steve Donziger has been in house arrest. Steve Donziger joins us from his New York home. We welcome you back to Democracy Now!, Steve. If you can start off by speaking about the trial that just took place. We talked to you right before the trial. You've since gone to trial and been found guilty. But talk about who prosecuted you and what the courtroom and the trial were all about.
Thank you, Amy, for having me. It wasn't a trial as trials are commonly understood. There was no jury. The judge who had already locked me up pre-trial, I'm the only lawyer in American history ever locked up pre-trial on a misdemeanor. I want to emphasize this is a misdemeanor case, a petty crime case, and I assert my innocence. But even if I were guilty, it's a very minor case. No one's ever been locked up pre-trial but me. So the same judge who locked me up now for 2 years, I haven't been sentenced to anything, is the judge who denied me a jury and alone decided my supposed guilt or innocence.
This whole script of right to trial by jury, this is a common misconception about the criminal justice system because the majority of people that are arrested actually don't have a trial. They don't end up having a trial. They take some type of a plea deal or they just sit there because they can't afford cash bail. It's a reality of the situation. A lot of people don't realize that. And so you start to talk to people that work in criminal justice. A lot of these people do not actually get a trial. It's crazy.
It was intended really to be sort of a show trial where a decision that had previously been made by the Chevron prosecutor, the judge, Judge Preska, allowed a private law firm, Seward and Kissel, which has Chevron as a client, to prosecute me after the government refused to prosecute me. It was all just pre-cooked, and you kind of felt it watching it in the courtroom. During the trial, Judge Preska was reading the newspaper. During witness testimony, all the main witnesses were Chevron lawyers. They testified that Chevron had paid them, Chevron private lawyers from a second law firm, Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. Chevron had paid them $1,300 an hour and more to help the other Chevron private prosecutor try to convict me. It was all kind of run by Chevron. And the dangerous part about this, beyond the fact that my liberty has been deprived and I've been unable to work and help my clients in Ecuador and do my human rights work, is that this is a broader threat to our society. I mean,
it's like basically what Chevron did there, where it seems like a lot of them are on the payroll. Basically what they did there, that would kind of be like expecting Julian Assange to get a fair trial in the United States. Because we know that wouldn't happen, right?
Cannot allow in any rule of law country or any country private prosecutions run by corporations. It's just extraordinary. If this were run by a normal prosecutor, the case never would have happened, or at a minimum, I never would have been, locked up prior to trial.
Well, I mean, the federal prosecutors refused to prosecute you. Is that right?
That's exactly right. What happened was, underneath all of this is the fact that I worked on a team of lawyers for years to hold Chevron accountable for the Amazon Chernobyl, this massive, deliberate dumping of cancer-causing oil waste down in Ecuador where indigenous groups have been decimated. And Chevron wanted that trial held in Ecuador's courts. And we fought for 8 years against Chevron, won this big judgment in 2011. And rather than pay the judgment, they decided to try to demonize me and try to criminalize lawyering, criminalize human rights lawyering. They've had this plan for 10 years. We know for a fact, and they've admitted it, that way back in 2010, they went to the SDNY, which is the federal prosecutor in Manhattan, seeking to prosecute me for this supposed fraud in Ecuador, which is just hogwash. And they refused to prosecute me then. And, you know, I kept going along with other lawyers to try to enforce the judgment against Chevron that we had won in Ecuador, which, by the way, has been affirmed by 6 appellate courts in Ecuador and Canada. I mean, this is a real judgment. And they then went back to this U.S. federal judge, Judge Lewis Kaplan, who's a former tobacco industry defense lawyer, and got him to demand I turn over my computer and cell phone and the electronic devices to Chevron. Again, no one's ever heard of such a thing in the middle of a litigation. When I appealed that order, he then charged me with criminal contempt of court for.
Okay, and that's how he got to where he is now, because he filed an appeal in reference to turning over his electronic device and his laptop, obviously. Which this whole thing to me was weird. I remember when the story, I first heard about this story, this was very strange to me. I'm like, why are they asking him to turn over things? And like nothing has even happened yet. It was very weird. So he was held in contempt of court because he didn't turn in those items. And so they basically put him on a house arrest, right? Now, just yesterday, this came by my way. And Stephen Donziger tweeted this: breaking in a huge blow to the rule of law, the U.S. Supreme Court today let stand Chevron's prosecution and 3-year detention of me after helping indigenous people win the historic Amazon pollution case. Gorsuch dissented. Our Constitution does not tolerate what happened here. And so let's go ahead and look at this article. So you'll see there's Stephen Donziger, there's Roger Waters, and I believe that's Susan Sarandon there. Let's go ahead into the article because I do want to show you this is really crazy to me. The U.S. Supreme Court let Chevron foe Donzinger's contempt conviction stand. Let's go on. The U.S. Supreme Court on Monday declined to hear a disbarred environmental lawyer's challenge to his contempt conviction after he earlier won but was unable to collect a $9.5 billion judgment against Chevron over oil pollution in Ecuadorian rainforest. The court turned away an appeal by Stephen Donziger, who has argued that his prosecution violated his rights under the U.S. Constitution because private lawyers appointed by a federal judge handled the case against him after the U.S. Justice Department declined to do so. Donzinger's lawyers argued that this appointment violated separation of powers principles set out in the Constitution, delineating the authority of the 3 branches of the U.S. government. They maintained that the executive branch, not the judiciary, should have pursued any prosecution. The New York-based Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals last year concluded the U.S. District Judge Lewis Kaplan possessed the authority to appoint the prosecutors who nonetheless remain subject to supervision by the U.S. Attorney General. 2 members of the Supreme Court, 6-3 conservative majority, Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, dissented from the decision to not hear the appeal, with Gorsuch saying that the Constitution does not tolerate what happened here. However much the district court may have thought Mr. Donziger wanted punishment, the prosecution in this case broke a basic constitutional promise essential to our liberty. And then it talks about how he shared this on Twitter. Donziger was sentenced to 6 months in jail in 2021 after U.S. District Judge Loretta Preska in Manhattan found him guilty of misdemeanor contempt for defying court orders arising from a lawsuit filed by Chevron. The Harvard Law School graduate had represented villagers in Ecuador's Largo Agrio region who sued Chevron for water and soil contamination caused by Texaco between 1964 and 1992. Chevron acquired Texaco in 2001. While not disputing that pollution had occurred, Chevron said the company was released from any liability because it paid $40 million for an environmental cleanup in the 1990s, and that Ecuador's state oil company, Petroecuador, was primarily to blame for the pollution. In 2011, an Ecuadorian court entered an $18 billion judgment that was later reduced to the $9.5 billion against Chevron for contamination resulting from oil production. And so this is where it comes in, where it says where Chevron then in turn sued Donziger and others in New York, arguing that he and his associates had secured the judgment through fraud by arranging the ghostwriting of a key environmental report and bribing the presiding judge. In 2014, Kaplan concluded in that case that the Ecuadorian judgment against Chevron in Ecuador was obtained fraudulently through a corrupt process, rendering it unenforceable in the United States. And this is when it goes into when they asked him to hand over his documents, and he was held charged with criminal contempt. So I'm sure this is definitely not the news that he wanted to hear. I honestly think this is ridiculous. This guy's been on house arrest for a couple of years now. Just it's crazy times, man. Crazy times. But that is the update on that case, that the U.S. Supreme Court let Chevron foe Donzinger's contempt conviction stand. So very disappointed with the Supreme Court, obviously. Not good. Not good. That's right, Luz. Disgraceful. That's right. That's right. All right. We are going to do call-in tonight. And we're going to talk about, there's so much we can talk about, but the topic for tonight is the IRS targets Matt Taibbi. I want to get your take on that, but I'm going to take a quick break and then I'll be back and we'll do call-in.
Muted. There we go. StreamYard had to tell me my mic was muted. Let's see here. Am I coming in all right? Yeah, looks like we got some good levels. All right, here we are on a Tuesday night. This is where we give our Sabrina a little break, and then we're going to come back with the call-in here. I'm putting a link to tonight's call-in segment about the IRS and Matt Taibbi tonight. And we can even show our little call-in room here. There we go. So yeah, as always, you can bring up call-in on your browser. You can install the call-in app on your smartphone and go into that. If you search for Sabs, and we want to hear what you think. You can talk about the Matt Taibbi story. You can talk about really most anything you want on call-in. It's a cool little hangout. We'll see you out there. Let's see. We got some comments here built up. Let's see, from Kimberly Davis. They're trying to make an example of Stephen Donziger. Loud and clear, don't mess with big oil. Yep. And from Betsy, noting that Attorney General Garland could shut this down in 2 seconds if he wanted to. Yep, very true from Betsy. We had from Barbara, we no longer have a legit Supreme Court. They are an arm of the corporations. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I like to kind of say and put out there, that, you know, all judges and all Supreme Court justices they're corporate before they're anything else. And yeah, we got ones that are supposedly on the left and supposedly on the right, but they're really corporate before anything else. And so that's what you're going to see their decisions come down on. And it's really just, you know, another form of corruption, you know, in our government. Let's see. We also had Desert Mantis, saying the three branches of the U.S. government: crooked executive, crooked legislative, and crooked judicial branch. Yep, you got to follow the money and the corruption if you really want to get to the root of what's going on and what we need to do to be fixing it up. From Vinyl Dreamscape, there is no rule of law in the United States. There is only the rich and the poor. Yep, very true. And as I like to kind of frame it, it's really, I think about it, it's really about that top 0.1%, the billionaires, the megacorps. It's really, them versus everybody else. And I feel like once we start getting that into our heads and into where the fight really is, I think that'll lead us to what the solutions are and what we need to be working on. Yeah, so like I said, we got call-in tonight. Here, let me show that again. And I'll put it in the chat again. That you can hit and express your opinion on the old call-in. I figure, I got a couple minutes here. I haven't talked about Caitlin Johnstone for a while, so let's talk about a bit of Caitlin. This is one that she posted recently. She does ones every once in a while called Notes from the Edge of the Narrative Matrix, where it usually has a number of comments, of kind of shorter comments. And those can be really cool to hit. Like this first one, she's talking about to serve in an immoral military. But I'm actually going to jump ahead, let's see, and hit some of these other ones. Yeah, so she said here, they keep making comparisons to World War II in order to groom us for World War III. Yeah, it's that thing, everybody's Hitler, every politician who isn't rabidly pro-war is Neville Chamberlain. And it's all this thing. It's about war tensions. And the war tensions are good for profits. A lot of this really comes down to as simple as that. Let's hit the next one. We actually don't need to accept that the world's major powers are going to be engaging in increasingly dangerous brinksmanship with each other throughout the foreseeable future. Empire propagandists keep telling us we need to lay back and accept this, but we don't. This trajectory toward war and nuclear holocaust is being driven by people within the U.S. government and its allies, and there are a whole lot more of us than there are of them. We can turn this ship away from the iceberg anytime we wish to. We've just got to want it enough. And that from Caitlin, and I always find just what Caitlin writes and what she comes out with is just really resonates with me. And then watch out for her on Twitter too. It's like maybe Caitlin Johnstone is maybe one of the good reasons to read Twitter, if you maybe just read her stuff and Sabby's. But there's a whole lot on Twitter you don't want to read. And another one on here, okay. Also from Caitlin Johnstone, from I think this is her latest post. People who get really into 9/11 truth or the JFK assassination often talk about how Americans would wake up if they could just really grasp what their government did. But it's important to emphasize that this is equally true of the things the U.S. is indisputably publicly known to have done recently in places like Libya, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, etc. Completely undisputed facts about things the U.S. has done since 9/11 are far more evil than just assassinating a U.S. president or killing a few thousand Americans in a false terror attack. They killed millions of people since 9/11 in wars for power, profit, right out in the open, right out in public record. Really, the problem isn't getting information to Americans about the evil things their government has done, or even getting them to grasp it. It's getting them to see it deeply enough and consider sincerely enough that it blasts through all the psychological compartmentalization and propaganda-induced conditioning that's been holding their worldview together. That's a big part of what I try to do here. I don't do any groundbreaking investigative journalism. I don't break any stories. I just try to find ways to help people truly see the empire for what it is with fresh eyes in such a way that it transmutes their worldview.
Yeah,
Caitlin Johnstone.
Caitlin's awesome. You guys should follow her on Substack if you don't already. She's awesome. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right. I've done my bit. Carry on.
All right, we are going to head over to call in. This is episode 93. We are almost at episode 100. The IRS targets Matt Taibbi. During the Twitter files hearing in Congress, the IRS made a visit to Matt Taibbi's house. The IRS is now targeting Matt Taibbi. Thoughts on government agencies and trustworthiness. So we're going to go ahead and head on over there. Really want to get your take on this. I had a feeling, I told you when that first Twitter file release dropped, I said, protect Matt Taibbi at all costs. Because these government agencies, they don't really like it when you start coming for them and revealing what's really going on behind the scenes. So here we are. We can talk about other stories on Call In tonight as well, but let's go ahead and head on over there. That link should be pinned to the top of the chat. I'm off tomorrow. I'll be back on Thursday. Other than that, guys, you know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight. See you on Call In.